When you have too much month at the end of your money and you can't afford to buy politicians, welcome to the Corporate Takeover.
With Rob and Tom. This episode, why neither party can be trusted to promote the interests of the common people. Join us while we discuss the history and what we can do now to change the way our system works. The protests aren't getting the movement they should through our parties. One of them wants to send in the military, the Republicans, and the Democrats want to take photo ops of them kneeling for 8 minutes and some odd seconds, but don't actually want to pass any legislation. I mean, there are a few, the anti-lynching law and stuff like that, but I mean, let's face it, that shit should have been passed in the 60s. But why is it now, today, that all of a sudden we're still getting jack shit done when the Democrats, at least from FDR to say the 60s or 70s, were the party that gave us change? So anything to add?
Or at least something that looked like change.
Yes.
Or we think is change, right?
Yeah, at least try to fake us out where they're not even doing that anymore. Okay, well, first off, are you going to cover the Powell memo?
No.
Okay. This actually is part of the Republican Party, but I figured the Powell memo is really important because it's that what the businesses needed to do was they needed to get people to believe that corporate power was good, that corporate profits were people's profits, and that the government needed to be taken over by corporations by installing pro-corporate Supreme Court justices. It was written in 71. Powell was installed by Nixon in 71. He was installed in 73. And while that was technically a Republican document, I do believe the Democrats heavily were influenced by it. And we're going to see with the first guy I talk about, a guy named Al Fromm. This guy was total scum. I mean, he thinks he's way more important than he probably was, but he completely and totally took the Democratic Party into that direction. He starts off in the 60s working for LBJ in the South, and he sees that this government, this program to help people, kids get to school and get nutrition and stuff like that, has two things. It has a grassroots and it has a state level federally funded program. And the federally funded program is run by white supremacists and basically the same old good old boys, whereas the grassroots was run by the people and actually got to the places that it needed to get. While, yes, obviously shit got screwed up because the federal government has to work through the states. In general, back then they thought they did. Now the federal government can work more through grassroots grants and stuff like that. But at that time, it really was set up to work directly through the states. And he saw that, and instead of going, wow, we should change that so that it goes to the grassroots, he decided that the federal government shouldn't help people directly and that people should just take care of their own stuff. And this became more and more hardcore throughout his career. And he got a job in Jimmy Carter's administration, and that's part of why Jimmy Carter became somewhat of a neoliberal. People don't give Jimmy Carter enough credit, both good and bad.
By neoliberal, what do you mean by that for the people that are listening?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Neoliberal. Neoliberal is another word for libertarian, basically. But they use that for the so-called left or Democratic Party. And what it means is everything's got a market solution. Right. Government gives the market money and the market solves it. Okay, or we just trust the market and the market solves it, which is exactly what libertarianism is. I'm sure in the comments we will get 1,000 people telling me I'm a piece of shit that I don't understand that, but that's basically what libertarian is the market is all. And at its most extreme form, neoliberalism means that you're going to want everything to be a transaction. You're going to want everything between two people, two businesses, two entities to be transactional.
So, like Karl Marx described the future of a late stage capitalist society where every single thing is commodified into, a dollar amount.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, actually, I have a joke on that one. Yeah. Okay. This is a neoliberal joke. It's not mine, so if it sucks, blame someone else.
Okay.
Okay. The Marxist says the worker has nothing to sell but their labor power. And the neoliberal says, I offer courses on how to sell your labor power like a shark. So, like I said, everything is commodified. Everything is based on the individual, on the entity. And basically, if you really want to break it down, it's corporate ass kissing.
Yeah.
Because me and you, we don't benefit from that type of government. Our kids don't get better educations. Me and Robert here are both teachers, both teach social studies. I also teach ESL. He also taught aeronautics. If they were funding education the way they were supposed to, and some people say, oh, we're giving it more money, but we're not giving it more money when you base it on how big the population has grown and how much more technology is needed. And even if, let's say, the money was the right amount, which it's not, you can see that in our failing infrastructure, how our buildings are falling apart and stuff like that. I mean, if you can't keep the roof over your head, how are the kids supposed to learn? Okay. Right. And if you've only went to really good, rich schools, you don't have that problem. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of charter schools in places like Cherry Creek or Manhattan or whatever. When you go to the rich places, you don't see charter schools as much or at all. So besides this not benefiting any except for the rich, neoliberalism wrote a book called The New Democrats and the Return to Power. After he got done with his Lyndon Johnson stuff and Nixon took over, he eventually started to work for a guy named a Southern senator named Muskie. And Muskie changed. He's the guy who said, "What's so liberal about wasting money?" That was his famous saying. Okay. And he completely changed how we funded everything through the federal government. He came up with is called the Budget Act. And what he did was, it used to be the Appropriations Committee just spent money. They got whatever needed to be done. And then the revenue people had to come up with how the hell to fund it. Well, the Budget Act says that the Appropriation Committee and the Revenue Committee have to come together to make sure that we can pay for whatever they say. Now, that sounds good. And if you're in a household, you and your wife should your significant other should get together and decide how you're going to spend your money. Sure. But in the government, you should always worry about what needs to be done and then figure out how to pay for it later. Although if you go into modern monetary theory, which is getting more and more traction, people like Joseph Stiglitz and stuff, they don't want to admit that it's working, and it actually is theoretically sound, but they're having to admit more and more that it's theoretically sound. I mean, here it is. The Pentagon has lost more money in the last 20 years than it has had budget to lose.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I mean, just in how much did it lose in cash in Iraq and Afghanistan? It was like $10 trillion. Right. And a war they're saying only cost 5 or 3 to 5 trillion, which I always thought was weird. I always thought that was a really low number considering how much our debt's been skyrocketing and all that stuff. But if you look at those type of numbers, money doesn't mean jack squat especially when you're a country as big as the United States. Right. Everybody takes our money.
Right.
And we make our own money, and it is a sovereign money, so we can kind of do whatever we want to do. Was there a need for this? No. But what it did was it cut social spending. You start worrying about social programs when you have to start worrying about the budget. And this is when people started worrying about the deficit and the budget and all that stuff. I'm not saying that it was never worried about before, but this is when it becomes this big budget issue. And if you look at it, the side that uses it when they're in power doesn't give a shit about it. Why? Because it literally does not matter. Whatever happens with the deficit and the debt, I'm not saying it has zero effect on anything, but it has very little effect, especially when you're an economic powerhouse. Like China could spend as much money as it wants, and because they don't give a shit what any other bank says about their currency, they can do whatever they want. The only reason we would have any problems with our money is because we're trying to worry about what other countries are doing with our funds. I mean, if you look at why Britain didn't want to join the euro, part of that's that. Sovereign currency is a very, very important thing.
Right.
And it's also why FDR took us off of the gold standard. I know a lot of people think that, well, not a lot of people, less than 10% think that the gold standard was important because then our money's worth something. But money is abstract.
Yeah.
And without that abstract, you can't do a lot of things with government. You will never make society better. Just play a video, one of those sim building games, and think about when you run out of money and you're like, oh my God, I have this material and this material, but I got to wait until I have this much money to invest in that. But I have all the resources. Well, that's what happens when you start making appropriations and revenue work together. You can have all the resources. Like somebody once said, you could give everybody in the United States a pony as long as you have enough ponies. So we can do whatever we need to do to make our society better as long as we have resources. And since we're so huge, we have those resources.
We definitely have those resources.
Okay, well, anyway, back to that. When Muskie came up with this bill, this is when we start seeing the technocrats arise, because all of a sudden bean counting is way more important. You've got to really have your numbers in a row. And it starts going away from the politicians. They can't just go, I want this bill. My constituents say they need this, and it goes that way. This is also when the anti-New Deal starts. I mean, along with the Powell memo, you have Muskie and other Democrats, Southern. Almost all of these are Southern Democrats, or what would now become the conservative wing of the party. And when he was working, he finally gets to work for Carter, and he sees Carter's not doing what he should do for the deficit and other things. Like he wants the office to go after Mobil. Mobil had been dodging its taxes and just not doing what it wanted what they wanted to get the inflation under control. And he says, well, nail them. And the people that worked for Carter that were higher up than him said, no, we'll just make it look like Mobil's in compliance because we want to show that they're worried more about PR than actually doing something.
Of course, that's politicians.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Fromm was wrong on that. I think going after Mobil's a damn good idea.
Right, sure.
But, I mean, because, hey, the devil's usually right twice a day, you know. So, and he wasn't a complete extremist at this point. He was just disillusioned, but he becomes more and more of an extremist. So after Carter loses, he starts reaching out and making this big network. And in 1985, this network becomes the Democratic Leadership Conference. And can you guess who one of the major donators to this organization was?
No, but I bet you're going to tell me.
The Kochs. The Kochs. Kochs are the biggest, and remember, geniuses can be evil. They are probably the biggest political geniuses in the American history. They have manipulated our system more than any other person or even group of people in the history of our country. They have hundreds of organizations, and the genius of them is they can just put a little bit of money, start up that organization, and they get other rich people and corporations to fund it.
Right.
And then all they have to do is point the right people in the right positions and stuff like that. And there, the Cato Institute, the Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation, which came up with the the ACA, or Obamacare.
One of the Koch brothers, I believe, and I could be wrong, founded the Modern Libertarian Party in America too.
I don't know if he founded it, but yes, he was heavily into it. I can't tell you whether he actually, but he was seriously important because he in 1980, and I'll go into this a little later, but in 1980 he was the vice president for nomination for the American Libertarian Party, the ALP. People weren't too happy with this DLC, and before the DLC became a DLC, they tried to work with Mondale to get him to be more neoliberal, more one of their boys. And he looked at their policies and he was just like, why the hell would we do that? And he may have tried to do a few of them, but in general, he rejected their overall goal of basically doing exactly what Reagan is, even though Fromm hates Reagan. I mean, in his book, he says he hated Reagan's policies. He doesn't actually say what policies he hated, because it seems like he should have been right on board. Seems like he just hated him because he was a Republican and he was beating him to the punch. I mean, he may not have liked maybe what he did in South America or something like that, but as far as domestic, I can't see anything that Reagan did that he wouldn't have liked if he was being honest with himself. So Mondale gets his ass whooped. I think he won. Yeah, he won one state, 3 electoral votes, and it wasn't his home state. I mean, that's not funny, but it is, because Mondale was a shitty candidate. He was milquetoast as hell. Right. I don't know as much about the primary that year, but the Democratic Party basically anointed Mondale because he was Jimmy Carter's vice president.
Okay.
Yeah, and much as Biden is, no matter what you think or what side of the equation you are on, Biden has been anointed because he was Obama's vice president. In fact, if you look at it, the party did not want Biden.
Right.
They tried desperately. They requested everybody join up. They wanted Kamala. They wanted Pete. They wanted Klobuchar. Anybody but Bernie. And the only person they preferred over Bernie, the only person they didn't prefer over Biden was Bernie. It's basically how this worked out. 2016 was the Democrats' version to have Trump. Right. 2016, the Republicans had no desire to have Trump on their ticket. They fucking hated him. Sorry,
I think that it says something about the Democratic Party, and it goes back to what we were talking about originally about how both of these parties don't actually want to change anything, because, I mean, Bernie's platform, like it or not, would have, radically changed America. And, the Democrats don't really want to change America. They're not an anti-capitalist party.
Yeah, no. Even though, here it is, people, you really got to realize that Bernie was the left's compromise candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he isn't really a socialist, to be sure.
No. I don't know about deep down he might be.
Yeah, he might be really. But
I know at one point he was a socialist.
Yeah.
But I don't know about now. I mean, it's hard to read a man's soul, but he just wanted to be FDR. Well, here's something about FDR. FDR wasn't this big revolutionary. FDR said, oh shit, we're about to have a revolution. And so he changed some shit so we didn't have a revolution. And he almost got killed and the government taken over for it, but he wasn't radical. His ideas were, if you're old age, we'll give you a little bit of money. Not a ton of money, just a little bit of money. And, we'll have a minimum wage so that you can feed your family. And just little things. He wasn't like getting rid of currency. He wasn't going to workers owning the means of production by any stretch of the imagination. He was just going, I'm going to fix enough shit so people go, okay, maybe this isn't so bad.
It kind of goes back to them both being liberal parties, right? They just have two different ways to approach maintaining capitalism. One of them, and it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, the Republicans want to maintain social stability through coercion, through police violence, through military occupation of cities, or forcing people to work under the threat of starvation, or increasing the use of forced labor in our prisons, which is constitutionally protected, by the way. And then the Democrats want to maintain social stability, through social programs that may or may not actually work, but it'll get their politicians reelected. They're the ones that give you food stamps, and this keeps bread riots from happening in America. So, one of them, but they're not, neither of them, like you're saying, neither are trying to actually change anything. They're not trying to, seize the means of production for the working class like a communist or a socialist would. They're not left wing. They're trying to keep capitalism. They're just trying to do it. The Democrats are trying to do it with a smile, and the Republicans are trying to do it with a gun, but they're still doing it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they have two different bases because they've divided the country.
Yeah.
And they're each going after their own base, but they're doing the exact same thing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And because the donors are more and more control, and they own the media. I mean, 90% of the media is owned by 6 corporations. And let me tell you something, they're not different corporations. One may be News Corp and one may be Comcast or AT&T. It's this, they all think the same thing.
Yes.
They're just like MSNBC is just like Fox. They're just, instead of going for boomers who mostly are retired or, whatever, they're going for the managerial class and late part of Gen X and stuff like that. They're going to people who consider themselves liberal but don't actually, get out there and fight and stuff like that. People who voted for Warren because she's a woman and she had some stuff. Here it is. I want to see a woman president, but I don't give a shit what somebody's identity is. I care what their policies are. That's the big difference between the left and whatever you want to call what's going on now, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And actually, there is a part of the Republican Party. I haven't gotten enough information on it. I don't know how big this movement is in the Republican Party, but there's a populist part of, or what at one point way back in history would have been called progressives,
right? Anti-corruption,
pro-worker part of the Republican Party. Hawley, Senator Hawley, and a few other people like that wanted us to basically nationalize payroll until the end of the pandemic. Because if they did that, then people would be able to support their families. And let's face it, since they all have donors, they looked at it deeper. They got rid of this libertarian, never spend money, the debt is everything thing, and they looked at what's going to keep corporations really in power and what's going to make sure the stock prices don't go down. Although, even though nobody's working, stock prices are still going up because the stock market has nothing to do with the regular economy.
Right. Yeah. People
giant playground for the rich. That's all it is. It's a big old scam by the rich. It's Vegas for people with billions of dollars. Except for you can really rig. Without being the house, you can still rig the stock market, whereas you have to be the house to rig something in a casino.
Right.
I mean, if Soros crashed the monetary market and caused UK $10-25 billion because he worked it so he had enough of their currency he could just crash it.
Right.
So, and then he short sold it. How the hell, if it's not Vegas, how the fuck do you build? Sorry, YouTube doesn't like cussing. How do you bet against a company? How do you bet that a stock is going to fail if it's not gambling? Okay, right. You're investing. You're supposed to be investing to make sure that hey, I like Pepsi, and I think Pepsi's going to do really well. Or I like Nike, and Nike just got the contract with the NFL, and that's supposed to be investing. But yeah, now you can do all these weird things with your stocks and stuff like that. Derivatives, you no longer have to actually own part as much of the stock. It's basically the rules never recovered after Clinton, which we'll get to. And they are basically the same as they were when the stock market crashed in 29. Very few differences. Okay, so let's go back to this. Anyway, he loses. So now all of a sudden the DLC happens in '85, and Jesse Jackson and called them the Southern White Boy Caucus. That's how Southern they were.
Right. Okay.
And Howard Metzenbaum called it the Democrats to the leisure class because they were also very, very rich. These were all people with tens of millions of dollars. And back in the 80s, that was hundreds of millions of dollars now.
Sure, yeah.
It was made up mostly of white Southerners, and they also had this group called the Cavalry that went around talking points about where basically they did the same version, just a left version of Reagan's the scariest words in the English language, the word from the government, and we're here to help. Eight scariest words. Basically, they were going around and saying that the government couldn't do anything right, and we needed to change it, and we needed to privatize things and stuff like that, and that the market worked better. And they tried to really sell that now, and we now call that, of course, neoliberalism.
Right.
And this is when the first use of this hope and change slogan. I just learned this. I didn't know. I thought, obviously, Obama didn't make up hope and change. They're words. But I guess they started to use hope and change, and he's just the first one to make that his entire campaign.
Wow. I did not know that.
Until I was researching this, I didn't know that either. Also, they formed the Progressive Policy Institute. Why did they call it the Progressive Policy Institute when they were clearly not progressives? Fromm was sick and tired of being called a conservative. That's it. They just right. So progressive had started to mean absolutely nothing even before we started using it again, because the corporate group had already taken it over. I thought the Progressive Policy Institute was bullshit, and I guess I was right. Now that I know that. There was one thing I thought that they did that was pretty good. They wanted to tie Social Security to productivity.
Okay.
Which if they tied Social Security benefits and they tied the minimum wage to productivity, they would both be like 10 to 20 times more.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that didn't seem too bad. I don't know exactly how they were tying it to productivity, but the article I read about that did not state exactly how they were doing it, but it seems like you're going to tie it to productivity. It's not going to be an inverse chart. So I thought that was pretty good because I hate to sound like the Young Turks, but I don't want to not give credit where credit was due.
Right, sure.
But they were also the ones that started the shareholder revolution, which led to the Michigan, I believe, Supreme Court decision that says corporations are there to make money, not to be good corporate citizens, stuff like that. They're also the big push for globalization, which the Republicans were already kind of doing because manufacturing meant unions and Republicans were against the unions. So, although sometimes, depending on what city or state you're in, that could switch. If you might be because of environmentalists being against certain things, so the unions could end up being pro-business, and because. Well, are you going to cover this part where the unions basically end up being kind of subservient to the corporations that they work for?
I'll talk about that a little bit in the talk.
Okay, I'll leave that there. Let's see. But basically, the whole thing was everything the government fails at is an apocalyptic sign. It's the sign that we got to get away from government. Not a way that, because, okay, we're both researchers here, me and Robert. And when you look at something, and I have a degree in policy, and when you look at a policy and it's failing, you don't go, oh my God, we got to completely go the other direction. You can if it's failing that major, but you do an autopsy and you just like you find out how somebody's dead. You go do an autopsy and you see what went right, what went wrong, and how can we fix that? It's kind of an engineering type of way of looking at policy. you make sure that you're getting the best results. So just because something fails does not mean that it's worthless. Because if you're trying something new, you're going to fail.
Right.
I mean, this is our first episode. We don't know if this is going to be any good.
Right.
And I don't want to insult Southerners, because here it is. I was married to one, and I know all Southerners aren't bad. In fact, most are probably pretty good. But I'm talking about the elites in the South, and they really hated the New Deal. They hated desegregation. They hated the modern Democratic Party because it was supposed to be their party. I mean, they controlled maybe not everything in the Democratic Party, but they were the major voting bloc of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party went away from them.
Yeah.
Okay. And some Democrats decided some Southerners decided to stay with the Democratic Party and fight that change. Most of them went to the Republican Party, but some of them decided to stay. And the ones that stayed are the ones that are causing a lot of the problems we're having now. Maybe they're not still around, but they've led up to what's going on now.
Right.
By the time Fromm gets, by the time Fromm really gets the DLC up and running, and by the way, Al Gore was also a founding member of this. Dick Gephardt was part of the cavalry. A lot of the people that we remember as big names from the late 80s and 90s, early 90s, were part of this DLC from the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton in 1988 becomes the head of the DLC. One of the reasons he did that, even though he was governor of Arkansas, and on his second term as governor of Arkansas, is because Arkansas had the lowest paid governorship of its time, $35K to run a state. That is insane.
Right.
You can make the same amount of money almost running a good steakhouse.
Right. That's true.
And to be governor, I mean, do I think he should make $500 million? No. But come on, he should be able to buy a nice meal. And I mean, you're the governor. You got to be able to treat people like that. You got to be able to buy that suit that makes you look good. If
right.
Nothing else.
Yeah.
You don't have to buy Armani, but you got to buy something you can get tailored and stuff like that.
A nice JCPenney suit.
There you go. JCPenney's, take it to a tailor. That's always what my tailor said to do. Don't buy a fancy suit. I mean, okay, the tailor I used a couple times because I have weird legs, so I had to have a tailor. Yeah, just get that JCPenney suit or Kohl's or whatever, and get that. Have them make it look good on you. That's also what they say on Queer Eye. Before we get into Bill Clinton, I just want to say that Al Fromm is not the be-all, end-all in destroying the progressive New Deal part of the DLC. There was Charles Mant, who helped change the funding. He talked to the unions who were fading, and we're eventually going to do an episode about unions. So I'm not going to go too much into that. I'm not going to go into it right now. I'm just going to say unions were fading. And so basically the unions were no longer going to protest how much money the Democratic Party was taking from corporations, because they knew that they could no longer give them enough money to win elections and stuff like that. And then Charles Mant went to the corporations and said, hey, we're now on your side, or we're going to start being more on your side. We need more money so that we can win and represent you. And some corporations are like some people, they're economically conservative, but socially they don't care.
Right.
Or maybe they're even liberal. So, although you got to realize socially liberal at this time is not socially liberal today.
Right.
Okay. They were not on the right side of history on a lot of stuff at this point. They were not pro-gay. In fact, the 1980 Democratic Convention, a guy who would be heavily influential in helping with the AIDS crisis, went before the convention and didn't say, hey, we're not asking you to give us rights. We're not asking you to pass legislation helping us. We're just asking you to recognize us as fellow human beings.
Right.
Okay, that's 1980. And that's a gay guy going, hey, we just want you to recognize us as your fellow human. That's it. That was all they were asking for.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody said that now, they would be called like I don't know what the gay version of Uncle Tom is, but I mean, they would have been extremely, people would be on Twitter raising quite a fuss.
Yeah. The gay rights movement has really come along they've gone a long way since I was born in '82. I mean,
They were also really lucky that Kennedy was a San Franciscan. Hated women, but loved gay people. As long as you weren't a lesbian.
Yeah, right.
He didn't like women. That was a bad joke. Okay. Well, I don't even know if that was a joke. Okay. Then there was another guy named Tony Coho, who wrote a book called Honest Graft, and he's the one that really started pushing business-friendly, not the whole policy, but actually started business-friendly legislature bills and stuff like that. And he also had a very friendly version of. He's the one that started trying to get the new Democrats into candidacy. He really pushed for business-friendly Democrats to run, and also he also helped with the fundraising. Ralph Nader actually pins the Change on the Democrats on Tony Coelho. All right, so just know that Al Fromm isn't the be-all, end-all, but he was a massive player.
Okay.
So if he's saying something, you can probably say, that's evil. And yes, I'm going to make that judgment.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so the Kochs and the Waltons were both massive players in the rise of the DLC, the Kochs with their money, and the Waltons supporting Bill and Hillary. A lot of people don't realize that Hillary was chairman of the board of Walmart.
Right.
While Bill was the governor. Well, I think she started in '86. So, yeah, that would have been his first term. And then, I mean, they put a lot of money into Bill's campaign. And, well, they really like Bill was a very pro-corporate guy.
Yeah, he was.
So just remember that the rich in this country really, about 10 of them, for the most part, really have taken over our country. That's why we call this the corporate takeover, is because those 10 people and their corporations have really completely and totally shaped our politics, have changed our institutions, have made sure that what you do and where you go fits within what they want to happen to the world.
Right, right.
Now, Clinton, a lot of people wanted, on the right especially, wanted to say Clinton was a socialist. That is the biggest pile of shit on the planet. That shit would fill the Grand Canyon. Okay.
Right, yeah.
Bill Clinton was the exact opposite of a socialist. He was massively capitalist. And his 5 biggest gains were actually 5 of the biggest goals for the Republican Party in the 90s. And I'm gonna deal with 7 things, but the first 5 were the same as the Republicans. First was welfare reform. Bush had actually done welfare reform. Okay, he did what was it called? The Family Support Act. And Bill Clinton knew this because he was implementing it in Arkansas, and he was involved with the GAIN program in California. You may know more about that than I do. No, he's from California, so before both of our times. But I mean, I was in high school when that was happening. You probably junior high.
What year?
88-ish.
Oh, geez, no, I was in kindergarten or first grade in '88.
In 88?
Yeah.
Huh.
I was born in '82. Yeah.
Oh, you're 9 years younger than me.
Okay.
I think when you told me your age one time, I did the math wrong. I thought you were like 6 years younger than me. Okay, so yeah, you would know nothing about that.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm sold. Anyway, let's see. So he implemented. So while that was being implemented, and that was actually a really good bill. I wouldn't say it was a great bill, but considering the Republicans just wanted to get rid of welfare and The Democrats at that time were still fighting for it. It was as good as it was going to get. The Democrats actually gave up on the work requirements. They let the Republicans have the work requirements for the bill, and then the Republicans let the Democrats have the training and the money for the training and the job training and stuff like that. So it was a really good compromise. Politics were not perfect back then, but they weren't as polarized as they are now. Right. So they still kind of worked for stuff. And I think while donors were still very powerful, this is when the donors are, according to Stanford and Princeton, this is when donors become really start their emergence. Their power becomes really big. Starts about Carter's time, about 75, really hits at 80, and then from there on it just grows. So they're powerful now, but they haven't completely, totally taken control. They're just 99% control. So they were still able to argue these small details. And it was the Family Support Act of 1988. But Bill Clinton ran on changing welfare as we know it, so he had to do something else. And he did a lot of rhetoric and stuff like that, and basically was what he was going to build on was this. But because his rhetoric was so strong, the Republicans eventually use it to get some block grants put in and stuff like that. And block grants are horrible.
Yeah.
Okay. Remember what I told you? You have $50. Okay. You can only spend $50. You don't make your own money. The federal government makes its own money.
Right.
So since the federal government can make its own money, they can spend as much as they need to. They can't unlimitedly spend, but they can spend a crap ton more than people think they can.
Right.
Once again, look at how much they've actually spent. When you look at how much stuff has been, like how much the Fed gave to businesses after 2008.
Right.
They gave $13 trillion in loans. How the hell are they supposed to be able to do that?
Right.
I mean, if you look at the entire budget of the United States, we're not supposed to have this much money to be able to throw around. I mean, if you talk about taxes coming in and stuff like that, we definitely don't have that much money. So I just want to, that'll probably be a common thing that I bring up, that really money isn't what people think money is. Because money to me and you it doesn't apply to bigger entities. It's like gravity and stuff. What works for atoms doesn't work for planets. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway. But then, so they used all the stuff back, and they went to block grants, and then they went too far. Bill Clinton actually was going to let it pass. He did not say anything. The Senate was looking to him to say, no, fight this. And he didn't give him that signal. So it did pass the Senate 87-12. Went to the conference committee. They added all this stuff about reinstituting orphanages instead of the foster care program, which is more expensive, but in general better for kids. Yes, there's bad stuff. I have fostered kids, and there's bad stuff about the system. Certain states have privatized it, totally killed the system. Texas and Kansas are two that I can think of. But orphanages are way worse. You just warehouse the kids end up having attachment disorders, stuff like that. It's really horrible. And also they were going to be draconian against disabled children and disabled act and food stamps. They're just going to basically get rid of them. Right. So when that bill came to the house, to him to sign it, he didn't. He vetoed it. It went back. He let it be known that if they separated the welfare part from the other part, that he had signed it. So they did, and he signed what now is our welfare system, getting rid of things like the AFDC. One of the things Fromm and Bill Clinton did was they got our system away from the legislature being in charge and made it the president being in charge. Even Reagan really relied on the legislature. The legislature up. He might told the legislator he wanted something, but legislation was done by how Congress wanted it to do, not what he wanted it to do. Whereas Bill Clinton became the leader of the party, right, and Obama was the leader of the party.
Right.
Okay, so he changes. That's a very important thing that the DLC changed. That was one of their goals, was to get the president to be the arbiter of what happened in the legislature. And one of the major things that they basically did was get rid of AFDC because they gave these block grants. And once the block grants gone, the state has to make up that money. And if it's a depression or whatever's going on, it's a lot of the states aren't going to make up that money, because states, because they don't make their own money, can't run as much of a deficit as the government.
Right.
And a reason I believe a lot of things should be nationalized, although that has its own scariness going on with our current politics. Okay, so I think I covered welfare. Then there was the deregulating Wall Street and telecom. The Republicans really wanted to do this, and Bill Clinton really wanted to do this. The most important thing Bill Clinton did was get rid of Glass-Steagall. That separates insurance and regular from regular banks, investment, insurance, and regular banks. It separates. And basically, with Glass-Steagall gone, all of that goes away, and now they can use anybody's money to do that. They also deregulated things like how much money you needed to make an investment. Derivatives were never allowed. And then because of Alan Greenspan, which was another thing Bill Clinton did, was keep Alan Greenspan as his Fed chair and stuff. The derivatives were allowed, and derivatives are what eventually caused the 2008 market crash. And they were never truly re-regulated. Here's a quote. Bill Clinton told this to the corporations: "We will support your efforts to increase your profits. They are good." And he also said to other people that he would hold them accountable to being good corporate citizens. But it's sort of like trying to push a politician after they're elected to do what you want to do. You don't get them to plan it, promise it before they get into office and campaign on it. You're not going to get them to do jack shit.
Right.
Okay. And when I get to Obama, I'll point out a very few exceptions to that. The next, telecom, 1996 telecom. That's why we have 6 corporations owning 90% of the media. That's why you don't get a wide depth of opinion and stuff like that in the media. And part of the reason for the Telecom Act was in 1993, one of the goals was to have the United States have fiber optics coast to coast in every town, in every building, and stuff like that. So in 2010, that was supposed to happen. Well, the government originally, the whole proposal was the government would just go ahead and install that fiber and then lease it out. And if we did, that would have been done, because the government has no motive except for to do whatever the politicians tell them to do. Now, contractors are corrupt and so on and so forth. It's not a perfect system, but there's literally no such thing as a perfect system. Instead, the telecoms companies begged and pleaded to let them take care of it. Well, I don't know about any of you, but I don't have fiber to my house, and I live in a new development.
Right.
You know, and they should have had, I mean, all they had to do is put fiber out to the new developments, and they would have gotten like, what, 80% of their goal just by doing that. And,
right.
Or every time they had to replace the trunk, they could have replaced it with fiber. Just by doing that, they could have done met a lot of their goal, but they don't even do that. They totally took the money. They did the mergers and stuff like that. And they basically owe the taxpayers about $100 billion for not completing that project. That's about how much money they've gotten. And if you count how much money they've made through profits and stuff, it would probably come close to $500 billion. Wow. Okay, so that's why the Telecom Act happened. And then there's the internet and stuff like that. And by the way, Gore never said that he created the internet, even though I don't like Gore. He never said that. He said he passed legislation to help the internet come into being. And he did do that. He did deregulate and allow businesses to profit over government research, which without government research, there would be no computers and there would be no internet. So every time you hear some tech billionaire say that he did it by himself, he's full of shit.
Right.
Okay. Because without World War II and everything and the big Cold War and stuff like that, all that crap wouldn't exist. That's billions and billions of our taxpayer dollars that they're making money off now. Okay. Next, free NAFTA. That was a big thing. I was actually pro NAFTA because it was sold as we were all supposed to go up. I don't know how Bush sold it. I think he just sold it as because they were both going to do it. Trump and Clinton were both going to do NAFTA. Perot was not. Perot was completely against NAFTA.
Bush and Clinton.
Who did I say?
You said Trump and Clinton.
Sorry, you're right. Bush. Sorry. Bush, the senior. And so the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was between Canada, Mexico, and America, was supposed to be all of the environmental regulations would go up to the highest, all of the labor rights and stuff like that would go to the highest, but it didn't. And a lot of stuff got put to Mexico. And also a lot of things go to Canada. People don't understand this, but a lot of like Ford and Chevy and stuff like that went up to Canada. Why? Because they didn't have to have an HR section except for to deal with sexual harassment and stuff like that. They didn't have to do any accounting for their healthcare.
Right. Yeah.
It's right there. It's done. People think that that's not important, but that's just lies they tell you.
Right.
It helps businesses too.
It simplifies things tremendously for them.
Greece had them. If you like small business, Greece had a great public healthcare and education system, and they had the most small businesses per capita of any place else in the world until their collapse in 08.
Right.
Whenever it collapsed, basically because about the same time. Yeah, I think eventually like 12 to 14 is when it actually collapsed, but it was starting to collapse before then. And our corporations, Goldman Sachs and stuff like that, were what caused their collapse as well. But this isn't about Greece. So he got that done in 1994. That was what cemented his leadership over the party, because the party didn't actually want to pass NAFTA. Democrats did not like NAFTA. Okay. He actually passed NAFTA with Republicans, not with Democrats.
Right.
In fact, one of the things was said, of all the opportunities you have this fall, NAFTA presents the greatest. Passing NAFTA can make your presidency. NAFTA presents both an economic and political opportunity. I can't tell you how much better it would make your life and how much it would strengthen your presidency for you to beat David Boinear and organize labor on NAFTA. That would establish presidential leadership in the Democratic Party, something that hasn't happened since '66. So once again, that's the whole president leads the party, and also people's saying that he needed to do it. I think that was Al Fromm that said that. Politically, NAFTA was a big win for him. If you look back on it, you obviously know it was shit, but I was 18, so I'm allowed to be a dumbass. So, I mean, I can't know everything, even today. So Fromm comes back into the picture with NAFTA, and he actually became a lobbyist during this time. It was the only time he was a paid and registered lobbyist, and he pushed extremely hard for this. And he went against, because one of the things also Fromm liked to do was bust the unions. And so he would constantly slam the unions when they were going against NAFTA. And I don't know if the AFL was for NAFTA, but all the other unions were against it.
Yeah.
Okay, next stop. I think that's pretty much everything you need to know about NAFTA as far as why it formed the party the way it is. And that is the point, is why is the Democratic Party not fighting for us right now? We're talking about that. We could talk about the Republican Party, but the Powell memo kind of says why they're going to do it. That and the Koch brothers lost. I'll give you another thing about the Republican Party real quick. The Koch brothers in 1980 had already been giving some money to the Republican Party, but when they couldn't win, I don't know why they thought, one of their missteps, they thought they could win in 1980. When they couldn't win, they decided to put all their money into changing the Republican Party. And that's why the Republican Party started having this whole deficit hawk and libertarian thing. So the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were both basically being changed at about the same time.
Right.
Organizations also like FEE also helped move the Republican Party to the right, to more libertarian economics. Okay, one of the huge things Bill Clinton did and Biden, although Biden, really what he did was the Death Penalty Act, and he did a lot of stuff with prisons and policing. Other parts of the act were not Biden. So if you're talking about drug sentencing, more police presence, that was Biden. If you're talking about other things, that was brought from other places in the world. So there's basically 9 parts to their omnibus crime bill in 1994. And the first part, first thing, Clinton got elected because he was tough on crime. One of the last things that happened in his campaign is he rushes back to Arizona, Arkansas, not much of a difference, more hilly, a little wetter. But anyway, Arkansas, he rushes back to Arkansas while he's still governor to watch a man called Ricky Ray Rooker be executed. Now, why is this a big deal? Was Ricky Ray Rooker? That's a tongue twister right there.
It is.
Yeah. Was he innocent? No, he was not innocent. He had a really bad childhood. He had been abused. The school system completely failed him. Social services failed him. His father was abusive, and he'd been into petty crimes and stuff like that. And one time at a pool hall, he just lost it and shot some guy in an argument. And then when the cops went to get him, they sent this one guy that everybody liked who could talk him down, and he shot that cop and then tried to shoot himself. Well, instead of killing himself, he just blew a third of his brain out. So Ricky Ray Rooker was lobotomized. Ricky Ray Rooker was never going to bother anybody ever again, except for the nurse that had to change the orderly or nurse that had to change his diaper and catheter and stuff like that.
Sure.
He was never going to do nothing. I mean, basically, this part of his head gone. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't. There was no function. There was no Ricky Ray Rooker left, except for his body and his beating heart. So people had argued that why are you executing a guy who can never do anything ever again? Isn't a death penalty to prevent other people from doing it, and because somebody cannot be redeemed? And well, the Clintons didn't care. There was a lot of people out crying that not enough, but there was a lot of people out crying that he needed to be pardoned. Not pardoned, but a stay of execution, a permanent stay of execution, because he was just going to sit in the nursing unit anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Clintons said no, and they rushed back. Literally, they were at a campaign event. They took a private jet to fly all the way back to Arkansas to watch him die. I mean, did they need to do that? He was going to get executed anyway. No, but it was a huge win for people who thought we need to be tough on crime. And something we got to understand is in 94, crime was going. For most of the country, crime was a big concern. I mean, if you look at movies at the time, all these drug dealers, and they were just gang wars, and everybody was worried about muggings and stabbings, and serial killers were a big thing at the time, and just everybody was really focused on crime.
Right.
They didn't realize that the stats were starting to go down. After 92, the stats started to go down.
Had the CIA stopped selling crack to poor black neighborhoods by that time? Is that what happened?
That was not a major source of funding anymore anyway. I think they'd stopped by the end of the 80s.
Yeah.
Because that one journalist who is played by Jeremy Renner in the movie, the HBO movie. Anyway, there was a journalist that went down to South America and got the connections from the CIA all the way through the drug lords, all the way back up into the inner cities. So the whole CIA crack thing is not conspiracy theory.
Right.
It is proven.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
There is no doubt among anybody who just wants to look at the facts. If you have an emotional reaction, there's doubts. If you don't have an emotional reaction, there's no doubts.
Right.
Which, when you're doing research, your opinion doesn't mean jack squat.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Facts, as Ben Shapiro says, and he's a vile, gaslighter, but as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings, and that's absolutely true.
It's so funny because he changes the facts to fit his feelings all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Ben, you suck. Okay. See if we can get a little Twitter feud going on with Ben Shapiro. get those numbers pumping. Hey, Crowder, you suck too. Okay. I'd say Limbaugh, but he died. Then he doesn't really do the internet.
No, I can't imagine somebody like him would be internet in the first place.
So if you can think of anybody else to shout out you suck to, just go ahead and throw that out. We'll make sure we put some meta tags.
Yeah. Hornbeck.
Okay. So the first thing that was in the omnibus was the federal assault weapons ban, which says if a gun has two characteristics of an assault weapon, it gets banned. Okay, a lot of people hated Clinton for this. Here it is. I was into guns at that time. Neither one of us I think we're both pro-gun control, but not anti-gun. Would that be honest?
My personal position on guns does not matter, but I believe that the way guns are discussed in this country based on history, we do not have honest discussions about guns in this country.
Okay, well, I will accept that. And he is writing a book, and we're going to have an episode about that too. Yeah, not just to plug his book, although might as well.
Right.
Okay, so really, I was into guns at the time, and I could find double stack mags all over the place during this time. Okay, if you looked a little bit, you could find whatever the hell you wanted. So the ban wasn't that great. However, believe it or not, it actually did reduce the homicides caused by assault weapons. Now, that's a very small percentage of the number of homicides, but it did reduce that number. So it worked for what it was supposed to do. However, pistols kill more people. If you really want to address gun deaths, pistols are what you're going to need to do.
Right.
Make it licensed and stuff like that. But whatever. Whatever. That has nothing to do with this. Anyway, then it was the federal death penalty. And this added 60, and this is definitely a Biden thing. He had 60 new capital offenses, including terrorism, non-homicide, narcotic offenses. Okay, terrorism, duh. I mean, I don't know about death being a capital offense, but obviously that needed to be a serious crime. Although, what is a terrorist? You can definitely go into that type of discussion. But a non-homicide narcotic offense being a capital offense? Are you freaking effing me? What the? So the guy from Celestial Seasonings can rip off $1 billion from poor old ladies and get 3 years in jail or 4 years in jail. And I could be the head of a cartel, never directly kill anybody and get killed for it.
I mean, I don't know what the level of narcotic offenses you could, but I mean, basically in this country, in most parts of this country, cannabis is legal, essentially. Right. So, I mean, understand that in the 90s, cannabis was not legal and it was viewed as a Schedule I narcotic, which is like heroin. So if you were selling weed, you could get charged with a non-violent narcotic offense, like what you were saying, and that could potentially lead you to the chair, which is crazy by today's standards. I mean, this isn't that much longer. This is 20 years later. And
if you don't believe weed was one of the things that they could do, remember, weed is what, Schedule 4, right? Which is the top line.
Yeah.
It goes 1 to 4. It goes 1 to 4. Yeah, it's a Schedule 1. So it's right up there with heroin. And drugs will be another episode. We're not going to go into why that is. So, but yeah, and here it is. I even bought into that crap. I don't know about you when you were a kid, but I bought into that weed was bad until I saw some people doing it and nothing bad happened to them. Right. But that's why DARE is a failure as a program. DARE is one of the least successful government programs of all times because it lies to kids about drugs. And then they see their kids, they say their friends do something, and they go, "That didn't happen." Oh, all your stuff is bullcrap.
Right.
Yeah. Don't lie to kids. They're smarter than you think. As teachers, we know if you give them crap, they will figure it out it's crap, and they will beat you over the head with it. Okay, so don't lie to your kids. Unless they're trying to, whether they look good in something or something like that. But that's a harmless lie. It also included killing a federal officer. Well, that's killing somebody. So if you believe in the death penalty, that's a capital offense. Carjacking with it ends in a homicide. I'm like, okay, but you already have the felony penalty, which most countries have gotten away from, where any death occurring during a felony becomes a first-degree murder charge. So I don't know why we needed carjacking to be reclassified in that way. But I guess it classified it as a federal crime because transportation.
And lynching was not.
Yes, lynching is still illegal.
Okay.
Well, legal. I mean, killing somebody is illegal, but there was no extra penalties put upon it. And use of weapons of mass destruction. So just about the time this is being passed, I think one of the first cases for the weapons of mass destruction was Timothy McVeigh.
Right.
The Oklahoma City bombing, which, by the way, Timothy McVeigh, and they do not point this out in much, was a massive white supremacist.
Yeah,
he had the Carter Diaries, which is a horrible book and it ends with like all the black people and gay people hung on lampposts and stuff like that at the end of it. I've read little bits of it. I couldn't get through the whole thing. I probably would have had a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. Okay, then there was and this is just punitive. This is such a bunch of crap. The elimination of higher education for inmates. This kept most inmates uneducated and lacking the skills to get a job after they got out of jail, which led to them going back to jail. And basically it says no Pell Grants or federal grants for education if you're in jail. I don't know how anybody gets their law degree if they aren't. I mean, it must be some organizations or have replaced some of that funding. But it's insane. There was no reason for that. I don't think there was a massive uprising in the streets saying, going, oh, don't give them an education. So
I can imagine a lot of conservatives sitting around and complaining about how they have to pay for their kids to go to college, but somebody in prison that murdered somebody or whatever,
Oh no, I totally see that. I'm just saying there wasn't a massive uprising. Yeah. There was no protests. If Twitter had been around, there wasn't a massive hashtag defund prison education or anything like that. Okay, so that was just punitive. That was just a BS thing. It had no positive effects, but serious negative effects. And the recidivism. There you go, that word. Just pretend I said that. I'm assuming it looked good, and Joe Biden did write that. It must have looked good to donors. That's the only thing I can think of. Like he was talking about a bunch of conservatives, rich people being pissed that they had to pay for their kids' Ivy League education, and yeah, this guy gets to go to the equivalent of Phoenix University.
Right.
I mean, yeah, okay. And I'm a graduate of Phoenix University, so I can make fun of it. One of my degrees is from there, yes. Okay. I almost defended it. Not going to. Okay, then there's the Violence Against Women Act. Federal penalties for rape. Good. I'm all for that. The Violence Against Women Act, I don't think there's too many people who think that was a bad provision. Once again, I'll give them credit where credit is due. Violence Against Women Act, good. I like it. But it also gave grants for federal prosecutor. Here's where I'm not particularly fond of was the Safe Streets initiative that was inside of it, which allowed a lot of more police officers to be on the streets. Just briefly, if we took the whole defund the police thing, if we took away all the jobs the police do now that should have went to social workers, teachers, so on and so forth. There would be very little reason to have as many. Well, there would be no reason to have the number of police we have. You would still need people patrolling the streets, making sure traffic and stuff like that. But would you need the massive spending we have on police right now? And it'd be cheaper. It would be cheaper too. Here it is. When people were saying teachers need to be armed, I don't know about you, but I was like, I know how to use a gun, and no, I don't want to be armed in my classroom.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not SWAT. Are you going to give me 200 hours of training every year so that I know what I'm doing? I mean, I can shoot a mother. I don't know about shooting somebody through a crowd or anything like that. Yeah, no. And then just on the basis, just being a teacher, I don't want to have a gun on me. I don't want the kids to think that I'm strapped and a threat to them.
Right.
That's
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The only reason I'm a good teacher is I make good relationships with my students.
Right.
Yeah. If it wasn't for that, I would be a crap teacher.
Right.
But I get them to actually care about what I'm saying and to, trust me. And that's how I get them to do stuff. Okay. Right. There was grants for shelters and education and community outreach. And you got to realize at the time this is, there were still a lot of states that allowed spousal rape. I think the last spousal rape law was 99. Yeah. So you can, in a lot of states, you can still rape your spouse, beat your spouse. I mean, there's a lot of horrible legislation on this shit. Yeah. Women's studies. And just being around a bunch of women activists too helped. I worked for NARAL and stuff about that time. Not work, volunteer. So I got to learn stuff. Always go around and hang around different people. They'll tell you way more than even your school will. I mean, traveling the world, like getting your basic education and traveling the world will probably teach you more than just about anything else.
Yeah, I think both in equal measure are good, because when you when you have the education and then you go to another country, you kind of know why things are the way they are, and it makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, no, 100%. I'm not anti-college by any stretch of the imagination. But anyway, although if you're getting a philosophy degree, maybe it is better to spend that $80,000 to go around the world. Just joking. Philosophy is not that bad. Communications degree, don't get that. Okay. I'm sure my brother-in-law, who has one of those, is going to kick my ass on that one. There's also the rape shield law, which does not allow certain. Well, I think this has been basically eaten up, but it was supposed to protect rape victims on the stand for being cross-examined by their rapist.
Okay.
It was supposed to shield them from like information being shared and stuff like that. And some of it's still there, and I think the cross-examination stuff ended up being tossed out, which is bullcrap, but, got a bunch of old white guys in the Supreme Court.
Right.
And also created the National Domestic Helpline. So, like I said, the Violence Against Women Act, the fact that it hasn't been renewed for 2 years now, I think, is bullshit. It is. There's nothing negative about this law.
Right.
I mean, for a decent human being, if you meet the basic requirements for being a decent human being, this should be a no nonsense law. It should 100% be a no brainer. There's something simple like the Driver Privacy Act, another good one, that said that your DMV information can't be available to other people. And probably the last time abortion rights got a victory, because the reason it was proposed by a Virginia congressman was that they'd gotten the addresses for abortion providers from their DMV by looking up their license plates, and were protesting at their houses and making death threats and stuff like that.
That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, and think about stalkers could do it. I mean, it's not. There's a million reasons besides that to do it, but that's what got it passed, or at least got it brought to the table. Then there's the Jacob Wetterling Crime Against Children and Sexual Violent Offender Registration Act, which is just called Jacob's Law most of the time. It created the registry, and it told states they had to keep track of these offenders for 10 years. And the offenders for the rest of their lives had to check in quarterly to make sure that they had up-to-date addresses. Now, I don't know how good to the best of my knowledge, they're not super great at keeping up with this in bigger towns, bigger cities. But it can't help you find somebody. You have the usual suspects to go to when a child's abducted or something like that has happened to them.
Okay.
Then another one that's not good, sounds great, but not good, because is the community is COPS, Community-Oriented Policing Services. It really tried to make that fit the acronym. It gave money for 100,000 more officers to hit the streets. And then as long as states were putting in community policing principles, I say principles, but one of these principles is stop and frisk, is the Broken Grass Initiative before stop and frisk. Basically, a lot of things ended up harassing and putting a lot of black and brown people into jails. Violent offender incarceration truth and sentencing incentive grant program increases the size of prisons and allows prisons to be made just about anywhere, like on barges. I don't know how anybody thought putting a prison on a barge was good, but you could basically have temporary prisons. Joe Arpaio, what's that guy's name in Arizona?
That sheriff that has the tent city.
Trump's favorite sheriff. Yeah, he was allowed to build that tent city because of this and probably something in the Arizona thing and the fact that nobody stopped him.
Wow, prison ships. That's very 18th century. I'm surprised America's going back to when things were great. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole when was America great? Maybe World War II? I mean,
concentration camps for Japanese people at that time.
Yeah, see? Yeah. If you're selective on what you focus on, maybe World War II and the New Deal. Okay. But if you're, not white, male, and middle or upper class, not so much. Let's see, increase the price of sentence. You could also put it in boot camps. They were allowed to use boot camps.
That's right.
This also gave us the youth boot camps. Getting youth into these hardcore re-education discipline programs that have been such a success. Thank you, Dr. Phil. Okay. And then there's some other provisions. I've talked about 8 things. And then there's some others like the drug testing for releasees that got put in there. And the 3 strikes law is also because of this. So this really is why mass incarceration happened. I mean, I didn't see it in here, but it also allowed for privatized prisons and other things got passed to help fund those that weren't directly involved with this, but were offshoots of this. Then another thing, the Republicans wanted, war hawks. I wouldn't say all Republicans wanted it. And by the way, when I say Democrats and Republicans, I'm not talking about the people who vote. I'm talking about the people who lead. Okay, I've met plenty of Republicans that weren't scum, and I've met plenty of Democrats that were. So I'm not judging you based on your party. I don't know about Robert, but I don't have a party at this point. I'm green, I guess, maybe.
I don't belong to either party. I was a Republican a long, long time ago before I went to Afghanistan and Iraq, and now I'm not a part of a party. I just don't do that.
Yeah, and I ran as a Democrat in 2016 for the state house. I did better than the people who kissed the establishment's ass. I actually won one of my cities in my district. Sorry, that's throwing a bit of shade at some of the state party people who will never see this video, and so therefore I'm talking out my ass. Okay, and I was a Republican when I was in Kansas because I thought I could vote for moderates. And there were no moderates, so I ended up doing nothing during the primaries. But I was a registered Republican when I was in Kansas because I thought there's Democrats there, but they're not going to win, especially where Ohio was. You go up to the Northeast, Kansas City area, yes, there's some Democrats that are going to win. But in Southwest Kansas, there was no Democrats that were going to win. Right. So I just went Republican so I could try to be in the primary, and nothing. So it was a failed experiment. Okay, so anyway, so both of the Warhawks wanted to get rid of us always using the UN to approve of whatever we wanted to do. So Clinton going into Kosovo without UN sanctions really helped them achieve that goal. Then that broke the U.S.'s dependence on the UN saying yes, and led to Bush W going into Iraq without UN support. Because then you could do that. There was a precedent set. Another thing that I didn't know until recently was Kosovo was de-escalating when we finally went in there.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm not saying there was a truce or anything like that, but it was the fighting had significantly slowed down. There were people who were seeing an end to the fighting coming soon. And then we decided to go in there. We weren't going to wait. I mean, it might have taken another 2 years. I don't know, but it was de-escalating at that point. Most people were thinking it was going to take about 6 months, and then it was going to be over. Okay, just everybody was in the area was tired of fighting, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, another thing. Did you know that a U.S. neo-Nazi was part of the reason for the Kosovo, the whole Serbian and Serbians, Croatian kind of Nazi philosophy and stuff like that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, there's a guy in Omaha, lived in his mom's basement.
Of course.
And he was constantly sending out this stuff to them. He was sneaking it in, a bunch of Nazi pamphlets, and I mean, I'm talking about like directly from the Nazis into there, and Nazi insignias and stuff like that. So, while do I think all Serbians and Croatians were Nazis? No, but up at the top, and a lot of people in the middle and the bottom did believe in a lot of the Nazi propaganda and getting rid of the impure Bosnians, even though I believe Hitler would have thought all of them were scum.
Yeah,
because there were that only thing Hitler saw any of them good for was slavery.
Yeah.
So they kind of didn't get the irony in what they were doing.
Right.
But yeah, it was a guy in that. And I just found that out a couple of years ago. Then Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the Defense of Marriage Act. These were, some people thought that these were great compromises, but, and it did cost him the House and Senate after he passed these. He knew he had to do something, but instead of going all the way, he came up with these small things. He could have done nothing for DOMA. The Constitution clearly says what one state says is a marriage is what all states say is a marriage. I mean, you don't have to do that type of marriage in your state, but you have to recognize that that is a marriage.
Right.
And that the federal government has to recognize it. Well, DOMA said that the federal government doesn't have to recognize it, and neither does any other state that doesn't want to. Then Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was kind of a solution that didn't solve anything. I mean, you would know more about that. I think you had a story about something like that, right?
Yeah. Basically, you don't want in the Army when I was in when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the way things were. A soldier, if they were gay or lesbian, they couldn't be openly gay or lesbian. It would be like literally illegal for them to do that. So
and sergeants and commanding officers and non-coms and comms that didn't care would just tell them to cut that shit out.
Right, exactly.
And I'm not saying that was shit. They have every right to be who they are, but in the military, they were like, "Hey, you're doing your job, man. I was just could you tone it down?"
Sure, yeah.
I
mean, if you had a chain of command, if you had a chain of command that was really, really draconian and really, you had a colonel that was really conservative or something, and they wanted to, they could just go around and prosecute anyone that was openly gay, or that had a showed a propensity or whatever the wording is.
Yeah, I never heard anything about the military. I do not remember watching a news report on the military speaking up about this, but I believe they supported it, or they wanted something slightly different, but they weren't against Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, some of them obviously were, but I believe the high ups were okay with what was going on.
I can't speak for them.
Yeah, he was a little too young, and I was just in my early 20s, so I may have missed something. So hey, in the comments below, go ahead and tell us if you got a source that says something about that. We are always willing to learn. Okay, so then you have the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, which will basically allow discrimination by groups that believe that women were not as worthy as men, or the LGBT community. It's exactly like it would sound if they proposed that today. Okay, it's the whole gay guy. In fact, the Supreme Court overturned it because of Kennedy. But it's basically the whole, I run a cake shop and I don't want to make you a cake because you're gay. Now, personally, having thought about, but ultimately decided I didn't have enough money to start up a small business, I'm going to take your business. I mean, maybe if you're like a Nazi, I might not take your business. You know, I probably wouldn't, actually. I would not put a swastika on a cake. But gay guys are just being them. I don't really understand how it's okay, you know. And
yeah.
But they, yeah. Anyway, but because of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, the federal government has a right to regulate stuff like that. That's how we got civil rights and the end of Jim Crow, quote unquote, and all that. If you can stand listening to Cory Booker, I suggest you watch The 13th on Netflix.
Oh yeah, very good.
I watched it until I heard his voice, and then he's such a sellout. I can't listen to him. But yes, The 13th is a good document.
It is.
There's better. I would go with The New Jim Crow. If you're going to read a book about it, The New Jim Crow is way better. I mean, not way better. It's more in depth. It's a book versus an hour-long documentary.
Right.
Also, let's see. That's basically it for him. Then we go to Gore, who is running after him. And some people like to blame Nader, and that's where we get our third-party blame game. So, like, nobody can run as a third party because, oh, my gosh, they'll cause somebody to lose. But it's only happened twice that a third party's actually caused somebody to lose or win. That was the American Libertarian Party. Definitely had something to do with Carter's loss, because Carter wouldn't debate them. So them being on the stage and Carter just calling them basically cultists and not debating them definitely caused him a couple of votes. And they did split the vote because not everybody was sure what a Libertarian Party was and stuff like that. But they, so some of the votes that might have went to him might have been caused by the Libertarian Party. You could maybe make that argument. And then I would say, what's the other one? Oh, Ross Perot. Ross Perot is definitely why Clinton's had a term in office. Bush would have won if Ross Perot hadn't taken votes away from. So just know that third parties haven't really affected American elections very much. Probably not since the 1900s, except for maybe Roosevelt. Also, forgot the Bull Moose Party. Bull Moose Party did cause the Republicans to lose because Taft was 08. Sorry, it was 12. Okay, so let's go to Obama, the next Democrat that came in. I could talk about Bush, but I mean, right now we're talking about why the Democratic Party is not responding to people, and I want you to know exactly how it became what it is today. Okay, his campaign was all hope and change, but he always coached his language very clearly. In fact, Black Agenda Reports was about to not endorse him and say that he was completely not for single-payer healthcare. But they decided they didn't want to be the organization that was against the first black guy having a shot to be president. And I completely understand that. Especially, I mean, that was a big moment. And, well, it's an incredibly hard thing to go against something like that. But once you have that, and then you see that not speaking up caused a lot of stuff, then it's easier to talk about the next identity that's going to be the first to be president or the first to be something like that. And I think that's how we figure out identity politics is bullcrap.
You're right.
Because do I want a woman president? Do I want a gay president? Well, we already had that, Buchanan. But I mean, I guess that's not 100% official, but I think a lot of historians are leaning towards Buchanan having been a homosexual, our first homosexual president. If you read his diary and stuff like that, it's pretty clear. Anyway, so he does this, but he was always talking about universal healthcare and access to healthcare. And as we know now, that is language that says we're not doing the same thing.
Right.
You know, and they were going to call him out, but they decided not to. What he did, everybody says, oh, he did the ACA because that's all he could do. He had a majority in both houses. He had an overwhelming popularity among Americans. 80% of Americans wanted universal health care at this point. He campaigned on how bad our healthcare system was. Everybody knew it. Everybody had a family member or a friend who had been denied. There was definitely a need. And here's the thing I just found out while I was researching this. There was a Harvard study that said that this was going to fail. It doesn't it doesn't control costs. It doesn't, and we're talking about the Massachusetts plan. And this, in 2009, Harvard, before this was passed, Harvard had the study that said that this was going to fail. That the mandate is not a good way to fund anything. And here's another thing. I also just found out, should have known this one. It's pretty easy to know. But employers paid a third for unemploying not insuring their employees that individuals paid for not getting insurance.
Right. So
you find $1,000 and your employer would be fined $300.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was completely BS. I mean, if you want to fund it, shouldn't the employer pay $1,000 for not insuring their employee? And
right.
You pay $100? I mean, more than likely, okay, if you're making $100K a year and you don't buy insurance and you're not living in Manhattan or San Francisco, where the insurance it costs a ton of money to live, then you should get $1,000 fine. But why should I, who make jack as a teacher, and my wife makes money jack as a teacher, why should we get $1,000 fine if we can't afford insurance? If our district is making it too expensive to buy or whatever.
Right.
And so that's why the health insurance, everybody, he even gave up on the option, which we now know would be a sure path to never having single payer here, because what happens with the option is they change the rules so that insurance can offload all of the high risk people into the pool for the public option, because they only can get the public option. And therefore it fails because it goes bankrupt. And then insurance goes, see how great it was. And see how great we are and how bad that was. And then we find, people start go back to believing that single payer doesn't work, even though it works in every other developed country in the world.
That's what Noam Chomsky calls manufacturing consent.
Yep. I don't think Chomsky goes far enough in his manufacturing consent, because I think we're beyond manufacturing consent to just creating consent.
Right.
It's not even manufactured. It's just, hey, this is it. This is the only option.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think Chomsky's getting a little old and scared.
Yeah.
I think he thinks Trump is Hitler and Hitler was Hitler. Let's face it. There's one Hitler. Is Trump horrible? Is he a piece of crap? Is he dangerous? Yes. Is he Hitler? No. It's not the exact same thing as what was going on there. A lot of bad things. Not saying that, just saying he's not Hitler. Anyway, so what made Obama a neoliberal? Number one, if you look at his first, unlike Clinton's first term, where he had some progressive New Deal type Democrats in his thing, Obama started off at Clinton's second term, where all of his cabinet picks were corporatists, lobbyists, from think tanks, stuff like that. He did not appoint, basically Citibank, as several articles have said, Citibank basically appointed his cabinet. And the Koch brothers, by the way, Obama took money from the Koch brothers as well.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. So before anybody know who the Koch brothers were, he was taking money from them and their foundations and stuff like that. Because there's not much difference between the Third Way Foundation, the DLC, and the Third Way, which comes around in '07 when the DLC is going down, which is basically massively funded by both the Wilsons and the Kochs and promotes globalization and free trade. And that's the major purpose of the Third Way, is to do that. So he listens to these people. So his entire cabinet is that he lets us invade. This is in no particular order. Just some stuff to wrap up on Obama is to get Obama here is Libya. That should have never been done. Libya wasn't great. Gaddafi is not a good person, but it was stable and it had the highest mean standard of living for any Middle Eastern country. Its citizens were actually fairly well taken care of. He wasn't perfect. It's just like Fidel. Cuba citizens are taken care of, but Fidel isn't the greatest human being on the planet. Or wasn't. He's dead. Syria, we should have never got involved in Syria. There was no need to. In fact, the chemical weapons attack was launched by Turkey, and they've proven that. The second one also was not launched by Syria. I don't know if anybody's proven exactly who. The second one was actually never happened. When you do interviews with the people that were there, they were like, it wasn't chemical weapons that sent people to the hospitals. It was conventional weapons.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I just found that out recently as well. So there is still some good investigative journalism, and you have to really donate to your favorite alternative media site to get that done. Net neutrality. People don't realize that Obama tried to pass to end net neutrality before Trump did. But here's the thing I will say that is different about Obama. He said, keep me honest, if you want to believe that he was truthful about that. He actually, when people got really up in arms about what he was doing, he changed tactics. So he stopped the whole net neutrality. He was pushing for more charter schools. He kind of stopped that. This is the last 2 years of his presidency. He pushed charter schools and testing heavily throughout his entire thing. Massive building up of bases around the world. We now have over 900 military bases around the world. Over 800 of those are foreign military bases. The majority of those circle China now, listening posts and stuff like that. That's insane. We don't need that. Right. I would argue we need very few military bases outside of the United States, period. I'm totally for keeping military bases inside the United States. If nothing else, it's a jobs program.
Right.
It does that. And, I don't know how much a naval ammo depot in the middle of Nevada is protecting us. But, I guess maybe it's a backup so if other depots are blown up or something like that. I guess you could kind of justify that, but we don't need to be spending our money overseas when we have so much to do here. And really the reason people are attacking, the reason 9/11 happened literally was, and Osama said it, you put a base in our Holy Land.
Right.
You put a base in Saudi Arabia near our Holy Land and holy places, and no, that ain't dealing. Because there was no reason for him to hate the U.S. until that stuff happened. There was, but as far as being an Afghan fighter, there was no reason to hate the U.S. except for us backing out and not funding what was it? What was that congressman, that Senate representative for Texas?
Charlie Wilson.
Yes, Charlie Wilson's war. Wilson wanted to spend a measly $1 million a year building roads and clinics and hospitals, and who knows what would have happened if we'd been able to do that. So, and Charlie Wilson was a Democratic Republican before that happened all over the place,
Right.
Let's see. Increased military spending. He did the grand bargain, which almost cut Social Security and Medicaid. That was Biden who did it, but he signed off on it, which said that if we don't reach a certain budgetary agreement by a certain date, then certain cuts would be happening to the military and to Social Security and stuff like that. When Social Security and Medicaid are funded by themselves, and we take money away from them to fund other things. That's the only reason we're having problems right now. And if we got rid of the cap, so that richer people paid more money, right now, if you make over $111,000 a year, you don't pay into Social Security and Medicaid. So by getting rid of the cap, all that money would make it solvent till I think 2070. It's solvent for a very long time if you got rid of the cap, and it's very simple. All you got to do is make it so that richer people pay the cap,
right?
Pay their fair share. Okay, so then he also did 93% of Bush's tax cuts were made permanent. Once again, this was Biden who was negotiating for him, but he signed off on it. He administered TARP 2 and gave it to, instead of changing where the money went, which he could have done, he kept on with giving it to the banks and stuff like that. And nobody went to jail for 2008. Then there was a war on whistleblowers. He arrested more whistleblowers than all the previous presidents combined.
That's right.
In fact, he went after people that George Bush said, "Nah, I'm not going after that guy." He was his all of the above energy policy was completely and totally scientifically unsound. There was no need for the all of the above energy policy. He could have dedicated himself to, and there was enough outcry to do it, to go solar, to go wind, to go doing battery research, and to go tidal, and so on, and geothermal, and all that stuff. And yet, even though there was this massive outcry to do it, he didn't. He led to a massive amount of fracking. Fracking barely happened before him, and Hillary pushed it throughout the world, and now it happens everywhere. In fact, my county I live in is one of the most fracked counties in the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is your water flammable yet?
Almost. I was on home hemodialysis, and I had to filter water, and one of my filters would last 12 weeks, and it went down to lasting 3 weeks.
Whoa.
Yeah, after they put a fracking well right next to our water supply.
Nice.
So it affected me personally. I know that's anecdotal evidence and it means shit, but there you go. Also, he did the TPP and the TTIP. Not many people heard of the TTIP, but it worked with Europe and was to get rid of a lot of trade between us and Europe, and to also it would lower some stuff for unions and intellectual properties, and it would have been just as it would actually had more consequence than TPP would have had. Then there was a South Korean free trade policy. He did that. We've lost a lot of money to South Korea since then. In fact, our batteries for most of our EVs are made in South Korea now. Where he did invest in battery technology. He did invest a ton of money into battery technology, and so right now, because of the South Korean trade that he did after he invested money into battery technology, all of our batteries, most of our batteries, are being made in South Korea. He didn't actually get us out of Iraq. Technically, the Iraq War ended, but we were still in Iraq fighting ISIS after that. Okay, George Bush created ISIS, but we were still in there to fight them. He increased our involvement in Afghanistan, the good war, which I got to admit, I believed in 2008. I thought it was a good war. It was not. It was stupid. But you live, learn, you get a little older, figure some stuff out. He also bombed 5 other places: Pakistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia. Special forces are now 70%, have operations in 70% of the world now.
Nice.
Yeah. Drone, and that's also some Trump, but here it is. Obama started it, and then Trump continued. Drone wars, execution of Americans without due process. The guy who was speaking out against America, he bombed him. The guy had actually never called to directly attack us or had gotten any attacks himself, and we executed him. AFRICOM was formed under Obama. So now we have a command center in Africa. He expanded our nukes program by billion over 10 years, or trillion, was it $1 trillion over 10 years? Anyway, he greatly expanded our nuclear program and kept Republicans on his cabinet. Gates, the defense secretary, was a Republican. He also departed after in his last term. He departed 5 million immigrants and started the whole cages part. I don't know if anybody remembers, but in 2014, a bunch of kids showed up from Latin America, especially Central America, and him and Hillary sent them back, kept them in cages, and then sent them back, saying, "Hey, you've got to know that even if you send your unaccompanied children, we're still going to send them right back to you." I mean, how is that America?
Right.
Anyway. He increased the surveillance state incredibly that was started by George Bush in the Patriot Act. He was he ran as a transparency president, and his transparency never became apparent, and especially on drones. And even though he was a doper in college, he smoked the weed, he did nothing to get rid of the racist drug policies.
Right.
Then Hillary runs in 2016, and Bernie runs against her, and the establishment goes against him. If you don't believe me, there is court documents where the DNC admits to completely being against Bernie and saying, we're a private organization, we can do whatever we want. What they don't admit is the fact that they closed down polls in states, the disparity in the exit polling in both 16 and 20. The media is complete and total blackout. Now, Hillary told the media, all of her friends in the media, to cover Trump. Didn't necessarily black out Bernie, but just cover Trump. And then we end up with Trump because Trump got $5 billion worth of free advertisement and all these networks with everybody. Instead of covering a Bernie speech, they would cover a open podium with nobody in it, waiting for Trump to show up to a rally.
Right.
Vice did a good episode of Vice Versa on Bernie, the media blackout, that you guys should check out. Like I said, the exit polls. This time, the exit polls in a lot of places were exact opposite for Bernie and Biden, where it was like 8% that should have went for Bernie, went for Biden. From the exit polls to the actual data. And then they're now pushing the future of the party as being Klobuchar and Pete. And Pete is Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Well, what do you think of him?
I think that he is another. I mean, I don't know. More about what I think doesn't matter, but I feel like Buttigieg is another, Clinton or Gore or Biden type. I don't think that he's going to bring any radical change. I think he's going to make the current situation, more comfortable through social programs rather than do anything to change it.
I think so too. Well, I think that covers up to today and why the Democratic Party is not there. I definitely probably should have been a little tighter, but I think I got pretty much why the Democratic Party is the Democratic Party today.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So he's going to talk about, so we try to do this in 3 segments. We do one where I talk about the present, or maybe he does, depending on the subject. And then we talk about history, what led up to it, not just recent, but like all the way back. And then we discuss what might happen now.
Right. So basically, I kind of want to cover, you covered the modern history of these parties. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the beginning of these parties up until about when you were, about the Nixon era, actually. And so, we know that now both of the parties aren't interested in really changing anything, and that, people, for whatever reason, they really internalize their identity based on what political party they belong to or who they vote for or whatever. And I mean, in my own lived experience, I cannot trust a political party myself because, George W. Bush said that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He defied international consensus on this and invaded a sovereign country and stayed there for, I think we still have troops in Iraq now over something that was never there. And he knew that was, the truth. In either way, I don't trust the Republican Party anymore. I used to be a Republican. I actually voted for George W. Bush. But after that, I can't trust any political party anymore. And part of that's because you can't really even the Democratic and Republican parties as we know them now haven't always been the way they are. What I guess you really have to understand to begin with is what left wing and right wing mean, and that's the important framing, right? What left wing and right wing mean. And those terms go back to the French Revolution, where the radicals that wanted to abolish the monarchy, some of them were, proto-anarchists and proto-socialists. They were all the way on the left side of the National Assembly, the left wing, and the people that were royalists sat on the right, and they wanted to maintain the status quo. And that's what conservative really means. It means that you want to maintain the institutions and power structures that currently exist. Okay. So what those words mean are what's important. What if I told you, Tom, that there was a time when the Democratic Party was the conservative party?
Oh my God, really?
No kidding. All right. So hold that thought. The GOP is formed in 1854 by free soilers, who are people that they're anti-slavery, and ex-Whigs, which are like social conservatives. But at that time, things were a little bit different. You could be a religious person and be against slavery because most scriptures are actually they kind of have this idea of human kindness and being good to other people and so forth. You might not know that by talking to some people now, but so this is a group of people that you wouldn't think by modern standards would get along. The evangelicals, if you will. They weren't really evangelicals, but maybe a little bit. And people who are radically against slavery. To be against slavery in the United States in the 19th century was a very radical left-wing concept, because what you're doing is you're taking an institution that provides a lot of wealth to a capitalist country, which is, slavery, and you're saying, I want to end that and force these people to pay their workers rather than just, make sure they have something to eat or whatever they were doing for them. So that would be like today saying, I don't want you paying anybody less than a wage that you can afford to buy a house on and afford $500 worth of groceries for each person. Today, conservatives would totally reject that. And in the mid-19th century, it was the Democrats that were the conservative party, because they were in defense of slavery, because slavery was keeping the American economy going.
Both White Houses were made from it.
Both White Houses were built from slave labor, absolutely. After the British Army that came from what is now Canada burnt down the White House in the War of 1812, it was rebuilt by slave labor, and the one before it, of course, was too.
And also, that slave labor picked the cotton that all the northern textile manufacturing needed to survive.
That's right. So if you're from Massachusetts or New York and you're like, hey, we never had slavery, you were still benefiting from it. And to be honest, Americans are still benefiting from slave labor. It's just in other countries. So, I mean, like I have a, smartphone here. And this is made, with basically slave labor. The raw materials are mined by slave labor. The people that are working in the factory that are assembling this phone are essentially slaves that are locked down to the factory. And I mean, if I were, I benefit from this. So when you understand that people in the North were benefiting from slavery too, this whole country was built by slave labor. Essentially, it was W.E.B. Du Bois once said that this country wouldn't have been able to industrialize had it not been for slave labor.
There was only 4 million of us. We didn't have enough labor if it wasn't for slaves.
Right. Yeah. So slavery is part of what made America, for better or for worse, to be sure. As a financial as an economic institution, it was necessary for the abolitionists back then. It didn't mean you were a-religious. In fact, Harriet Tubman, John Brown, Nat Turner were all super religious people. We would almost call them zealots today. So it was possible to be a religious person who was also a very left-wing person in the 19th century. In the 1860 election, the abolitionists for Republican Party had won the presidency with Abraham Lincoln. The Democrats of the South, because, just like today, the South was a much more conservative place than the rest of the country. The Democrats in the South saw him as a really polarizing figure, because he was, some billionaire businessman who said racist things and openly supported, fascist groups, but because they just believed he was going to outlaw slavery, and that was changing the status quo. It was going against what was then the conservative line. Now, remember that not all abolitionists were against, they weren't all the same. They weren't on the same sheet of music. So most abolitionists weren't exactly, they weren't on the same sheet of music. Like Abraham Lincoln, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, essentially thought that, we'll free the black slaves, but we'll send them back to Africa. And some abolitionists wanted that. Some abolitionists wanted to end slavery slowly over time so as to minimize its impact on business. Just like when we talk about the $15 minimum wage today, some people say we need that right now because people need groceries. And there's other people that say, well, we got to raise the minimum wage slowly over several years so that businesses aren't hurt by the sudden change. So, it's still changing, but it's a very slow pro-business way to change things so that, things aren't too crazy, right? And then some wanted to end slavery right now, like John Brown or Frederick Douglass or any of the cool people from history at that time that you can name. So the Democratic Party, the Republican Party is formed in 1854 or whatever, right? So the Democratic Party is formed in 1828 by supporters of Andrew Jackson. But a lot of times, and you'll even hear modern Democratic politicians say this, that the Democratic Party of today is descended from one of the first political parties, the Democratic Republican Party, which is Thomas Jefferson's party. So a lot of times I've heard Hillary Clinton say, well, this is the party of Jefferson and stuff like that. They're not the party of Jefferson. The Democratic Party for its early years was a pro-business, states' rights, small government party. If you think about what the Emancipation Proclamation was, it was, if you want to use the parlance of today's politics, it was big government using federal law to force businesses to do something. And that, just like today, that would piss off conservatives. It pissed off conservatives back then too. It's a pro-business, small government party, and it preserved the old power structures in America, and part of that is slavery. And we've talked about why slavery is so important to conservatives and businesses back then. Part of that's because it's lucrative. You don't have to pay anybody anything at all. And because slavery had been the way things were done since 1619. And this had created a racial caste system in America where being a white male was a legal status that meant something. It gave you certain rights that other people didn't have. Back to the 1860s. By 1860, senators were beating each other with canes during sessions of Senate over slavery. People were killing each other in what we call Bleeding Kansas. A Republican, John Brown, raided a federal military installation to arm slaves for an uprising. And Robert E. Lee, a Democrat, who's now, by the way, a conservative hero, caught him and oversaw his public execution. The country was incredible.
Happily.
Yeah, exactly. Very happy to do it. And so the country at that time was very polarized, just like it's polarized now. And that's scary. So after Lincoln's elected, the states that had a higher presence of Democrats, so the conservative states in the South, they seceded from the Union and declared their independence. And in every founding document from the Confederacy, be it their states' declarations of secession or or their Constitution, the word slavery gets used quite a bit.
Well, yeah, and one of the two things that was a major difference from the U.S. Constitution to the Confederacy was slavery was made eternal. It was to never be abolished, and there was actually no way to secede.
Right.
So they complained about how their rights were their rights were trampled on when the war happened, but they made sure that nobody that joined the Confederacy could leave.
Right, exactly. And to join the Confederate States, you had to accept slavery as it. Well, I'll read part of that, the Confederate Constitution, but so basically, to say that the Civil War wasn't over slavery it's gaslighting, it's making things up, and it's rewriting history to fit a narrative, and that's dishonest.
Did you read that article? Or there was a video actually from Vox, and it really explains how that got started and why it became so popular with the Daughters of the Confederacy and how they went to all the textbook companies and stuff like that. Yeah, they went around and made everybody publish stuff. They use it as political pressure and stuff like that to get people to publish the lost cause in their textbooks and stuff like that. I mean, that's why we believe in that crap today.
Right, exactly. I can read part of some of these declarations of secession.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, most people haven't read it. I mean, or even heard it. So. Okay.
So this is from the South Carolina Declaration of Secession. You can find it in the Yale online library of primary sources. The general government, as a common agent, passed laws into effect these stipulations for the states. For many years, these laws were executed, but an increasing hostility on the part of the non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery has led to a disregard of their obligations, and the laws of the general government have ceased to affect the objects of the Constitution. And it goes on to say, but the current of anti-slavery feeling has led her to more recently enact laws which render inoperative the remedies provided by her own law and by laws of Congress. In New York, even the right of transit of slaves had been denied by her tribunals. So the state of South Carolina is seceding because it's not easy to be a slaveholding state in the United States,
which is bullcrap at that point. But I guess if you look at the history, it has been leading up to eventually the United States would abolish it, and with California coming in 1850, it kind of ended where slavery could expand.
Yeah.
It didn't take as much territory as they probably wanted from Mexico. So, because that was the whole point of the Mexican-American War, was to expand this slave territory.
Right. Yeah. You're right. Yeah, exactly. This is from, here, I'll get another declaration of secession. This is Texas. Texas abandoned her separate national existence and consented to being one of the Confederated Union to promote welfare, ensure domestic tranquility. They use a lot of the founding fathers rhetoric, just like conservatives of today do, and secure more substantially the blessings of peace and liberty to her people. And I would put in quotation or in parentheses, white people. She has received into the Confederate
males.
Yeah, exactly. Her own constitution under the guarantee of the federal Constitution and the compact of annexation, that she should enjoy these blessings. She was received as a Commonwealth holding, maintaining and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of Africans to the white race within her limits.
Do you know if they kept the whole, if they went back to the land holding, or if they kept the populist people electing senators and stuff like that?
In Texas?
No, in the South, in the Confederacy, did they go back to land holding as the only way you could vote, or did they keep the popular vote?
That's a good question. I'm not that familiar.
I never checked that out either. So if you know, put it in the comments.
Right. And this is Article 4, Section 3 of the Confederate Constitution. The Confederate States may acquire new territory, and Congress shall have the power to legislate and provide governments for the inhabitants of all territories belonging to the Confederate States, lying without limits of the several states, and may permit them at such times in such manner as it may by law provide to form states and be admitted into the Confederacy. In all such territory, the institution of Negro slavery as it exists in the Confederate States shall be recognized and protected by Congress and the territorial government, and the inhabitants of the several Confederate States shall have the right to take such territory, any slaves lawfully held by them in any states or territories within the Confederate States. Basically saying that they want slavery to join the Confederacy. You have to allow slavery to exist in your state, and you have to allow slaves to be trafficked through your state. That's hardwired into Article 4 of their Constitution. So the Confederacy was very much a white supremacist state. It was run by the Democratic Party, but to say that that's the same Democratic Party we have today isn't really fair. And here's another thing to drive that home. Karl Marx, the father of communism, the guy that scares every American and keeps children awake at night.
Because no American actually understands him.
Yeah, most Americans have never read anything he's ever written. But one thing that he did write was letters to Abraham Lincoln. So when Abraham Lincoln, he supported the Republican Party in the 1800s. In fact, he wrote this letter to Abraham Lincoln after he was reelected. He goes, "We congratulate the American people on your reelection by a large majority. If resistance to the slave power was the reserved watchword for your first election, the triumphant war cry for your reelection is death to slavery." And he goes on to say, the working class people of the world are looking to America and looking to the Republican Party to lead, the oppressed people out of their bondage and so on and so forth.
And the Republican Party changes really quickly after this too. So
Right. And so Ambassador Adams, who was the one that took the letter to Lincoln read it, and he responded back to Karl Marx on behalf of Lincoln, responds to his letter. I'm directed to inform you that the address of the Central Council of your association, which was duly transmitted through the legislation, the association he's referring to is the Working Men's Association. It's a communist organization.
Yeah.
Which was duly transmitted through this legation to the President of the United States, was received by him. So far as the sentiments expressed by it are personal, they are accepted by him with sincere and anxious desire that he may be able to prove himself not unworthy of the confidence which has been recently extended to him by his fellow citizens and by so many friends of humanity and progress throughout the world. So, Abraham Lincoln was like, "Thank you. I hope I can live up to what Karl Marx wants me to do." So to say that the Democrats are, the party of the KKK and the Confederacy, sure, but you also have to accept that at that time, Abraham Lincoln was friends with Karl Marx.
Well, acquaintances, pleasant sure. Acquaintances, yeah. Because sure. I don't think they ever met. They just
no, they didn't meet. Karl Marx never came to America.
Yeah,
but they were for American newspapers. Positive terms through writing.
Yes, he worked for American newspapers, but he never actually.
That's right.
In fact, I just found out he basically invented modern political journalism.
Yeah.
Because it's basically take what's happening now and do what we're doing. Show why it's happening.
Right, exactly. So the Civil War takes place and Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, living up to what Karl Marx wanted him to. And this is not simply because Lincoln was focused on racial justice at this time more than ever. It was in the context of Lincoln, sure, yes, but not in the context of what we would like. He mostly did that to break the back of the Southern plantation economy, because to the European powers that wanted to get involved, a lot of times helping the Confederacy, they saw it was now framed as a free states versus slave states kind of war, and nobody wants to side with the slave owners. The South lost.
Well, that's why the Emancipation didn't free the 4 states that were in the Union that had slaves. Didn't free any of their slaves. Delaware, Missouri, Kentucky.
It might have been Kentucky. There were almost no slaves actually in those states.
No, but it was legal.
Yeah, it was legal because they because of slave trafficking, basically.
That's why I always remember Missouri and Delaware, because there actually were slaves there. It was important in those two states. But the other two states, Maryland, you're right. Yeah, Maryland was. So 3 out of the 4 were important, and then Kentucky. Well, it was they didn't care. It just was still on the books or whatever. They didn't. Right. They didn't care to get rid of it either.
Right. Yeah. Right. So the South lost the Civil War, obviously, and Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Fun fact: he was there when John Brown was hung. He went and attended the public execution, and he called Lincoln a tyrant when he shot him. Because he was bringing big government and forcing the businesses to do stuff.
However, Wilkes' brother saved Lincoln's son.
I did not know that.
Yeah, saved him from a train.
That's crazy.
Yeah, there's all these little things, and his brother wasn't as big of a jerk. Yeah, he wasn't. Okay. He wasn't like political like his other. He didn't. He just did his thing, and yeah, there was no big declarations or anything. I mean, privately he may have been a huge jerk, but publicly he didn't say anything.
Well, that's cool. At least one of the family wasn't a bad person.
Yeah.
After the Civil War, there's an attempt at Reconstruction, which was to bring African Americans into the electorate, put them into places of political power, and integrate them from slavery into the regular everyday into being citizens. And of course the KKK, which were veterans of the Confederate Army, terrorized African Americans and anybody that tried to help them vote, or anyone that tried to help them have equal rights with the white people in the South. Because again, this is being conservative. You're preserving the status quo. You're protecting the institutions of power. Over the rest of the 19th century, the country focused mostly on westward expansion with the railroads and industrialization. The country became less polarized. And by the early 20th century, this country was in the depths of what Mark Twain called the Gilded Age, which was a time of unregulated business where industries dominated entire industries. Basically, one guy like Rockefeller would control entire industries. The country had the worst wealth distribution it had ever had before, rivaling what we have now. And
actually, I would say I think we've passed the height of that, which was 1913.
Oh yeah, we passed
that.
Well, than we were then. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Until now, like that was the most.
Yeah. You're right.
So the progressive movement begins. The progressive movement that we know today is different from the one of the early 20th century. They basically were focused on progress of any sort, and that meant different things to different people. There was a woman named Margaret Sanger who a lot of feminists know who she is. She is kind of responsible for starting Planned Parenthood and having birth control access available to a lot of women. Emma Goldman.
She was also heavily involved with the creation of the pill.
Right. Yes, exactly. And Emma Goldman was a famous American radical anarchist. And she was arrested a bunch of times for violating the Comstock Act, which made it illegal to hand out literature to women about birth control. She was a radical anarchist, but she was also considered part of the progressive movement. And then Eugene Debs, who was a socialist. He's one of the most famous American socialists. He ran on a third-party ticket from prison and did quite well, actually. And he was associated with the progressive movement because he wanted to liberate the working class, and he led a bunch of strikes because people didn't get paid hardly anything back then for really, really dangerous hard work.
You'd be lucky if you got $5 a week.
Right. And interestingly enough, he was a Republican before he became a socialist. Exactly. Some people believed in eugenics. And so this is the dark side of the progressive movement. Eugenics is this idea that you can create a better person kind of like through selective breeding, like people do towards dogs or whatever. They didn't understand genes back then, but they thought that you could if you sterilized somebody, for example, that came from a family of alcoholics, you could end alcoholism, right? Because then nobody would have the gene for alcoholism or whatever, or poverty. They thought poverty was related to genes. There were efforts to sterilize people, right? but this was part of the progressive movement because it was progress for humanity or whatever they wanted to call it. Hitler actually took cues from this with his racial policies.
Also, our treatment of Native Americans in the reservations.
Right. And there were forced sterilizations of Chinese people at this time because Chinese people were considered undesirable by these.
That I didn't know.
In California in particular, there were health clinics that they were free health clinics, and they were put in neighborhoods where there were a lot of Chinese people, and they would go in, and the doctor would say, okay, you need surgery, we're going to put you under, and they'd wake up and they'd be castrated. There was also a doctor named Dr. Hazelden. They used to call him the Black Stork. People would bring their kid, people that bought into this nonsense of eugenics, they would bring their sick child to Dr. Hazelden, and they'd say like, oh man, my son's got 103-degree fever and he's coughing and we don't know what to do. And Dr. Hazelden would say, I know just what we'll do. Hand me the baby. And he'd take him and set him in another room and then just leave him there. And the idea was if he survived without any medicine, then he was worth keeping around. But if he died, then that's one less person that can't fight off diseases. And people bought into this.
Oh yeah, well, like people still believe in that with the coronavirus. They're saying, oh, if you get it, obviously you're weak. If you're not, that they don't understand that 20%. Well, the media isn't publishing this either very well, but 20% of people who get corona end up with long-term health problems.
Right, and some based on this idea, some people supported imperialism and things that we would identify as very right-wing ideas, and others like John Muir, who was like basically a Scottish hippie with a beard longer than mine, he supported wildlife conservation. And the Sierra Club of today, the people that want to save the trees, they were started by John Muir. And John Muir is part of why we have national parks, because he went to Teddy Roosevelt and was like, hey, if you don't let Rockefeller completely destroy the Yosemite Valley, you can go there and kill a bunch of animals. And Teddy Roosevelt was like, yeah, that's a good idea. So Teddy Roosevelt was actually a progressive Republican. And that sounds crazy, but at this time, remember, progressive meant a bunch of different things to different people. In 1906, soldiers from the 25th Infantry Regiment of fame during the Spanish-American War, they were there in Cuba at the same time Teddy Roosevelt was there. They took heavy casualties. They were the closest battalion to Santiago and so on. After the war ended, they were stationed outside of Brownville, Texas, and they were accused falsely of murdering some people in a drunken shooting rampage. They were later found to be completely innocent of this. But at the time, there was clamor to have them all kicked out of the Army with dishonorable discharges, and Teddy Roosevelt did that. He gave the entire company dishonorable discharges. And so the African American community at the time, which, it sounds crazy now, but they would have all voted Republican because of Lincoln and freeing the slaves and stuff like that. This alienated a lot of African Americans, so they left the Republican Party or they didn't vote or whatever at that time. And Teddy Roosevelt but to his credit, he also threatened to nationalize the coal mines because of the wages, something a Republican would never consider doing today, nationalizing.
Or a Democrat.
Or a Democrat, exactly. Or a Democrat. Because, it's easy to say that the Democrats care, but they don't.
There's a few, maybe.
Yeah, maybe a few. Yeah, sure. AOC, maybe.
I don't know. We'll see. History will tell. History will tell.
Going into the 20s and 30s, the Republican Party became the party of business. So they had switched sides kind of with the Democratic Party, although they're both kind of the party of business at this time. Calvin Coolidge, a Republican, famously said, the chief business of the American people is business. And that was the mindset the country went into in the 1920s. It was a time of consumerism and easy credit and unregulated markets, which did great things for investors for a while anyway, until the market crashed in 1929.
Oh, because people ran out of credit and weren't making any more money. And
right.
Then they started losing jobs because that went backwards to all of a sudden nobody's buying anything. So therefore you don't need people to sell things or build things. And
Right, exactly.
You have to cover the business cycle in California?
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's one of our standards too.
Actually, one of the only times I make my students do math is I have them do this. Well, it's a bunch of different graphs that where they have to like do. It's not difficult math; it's economics, but it's kind of showing them how the Depression worked on paper, and it's kind of
excellent. I'll have to steal that from you.
Oh yeah, I have
ever hired again.
Yeah. So FDR gets elected. He's a Democrat, and at this time, there's still veterans of the Civil War around. He actually went to a parade for the veterans of the Civil War, and he gave a speech where he started out with "Veterans of the Blue and the Gray." He was raised by these, New England aristocrats, just like Teddy Roosevelt was raised by the New England aristocrats. These people never worked for a living or anything. They were, powdered nose, very wealthy people. But Teddy Roosevelt's father was a philanthropist, and he'd raised his kids to have philanthropic values. And so FDR had some philanthropic values in him as well growing up. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, also championed feminist causes. She was actually what we would consider today, by today's standards, to be progressive. She championed feminist causes, racial equality causes, and labor causes.
The country would be a much better place if her ass had been president instead of him.
Right, absolutely. But, FDR's the president during the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and then later a two-front war against fascism. That's a tough time to be president. I'm not making any excuses for any of the bad things he said. He did. I'm just, saying. And having people like Eleanor Roosevelt in the Democratic Party is an important change in the Democratic platform, because now it's not explicitly just a party of rich white men from the South. Before this, it's the party of small government, and now FDR is beginning to deficit spend to give people jobs. And a lot of bridges, like the Golden Gate Bridge in my favorite city, San Francisco, that was built during the Great Depression by a government program that was created by deficit spending to give people jobs. And
I never thought about how Eleanor Roosevelt changed the party.
Yeah, having people like that, and then Harry Bridges was a communist, but there were who was that guy? Henry Wallace. Wallace also a change for the Democrats. Henry Wallace was like the Bernie Sanders of the 1930s and 40s.
Pretty damn close.
Yeah,
except for he was tougher. He didn't pull punches.
Yeah, that's true. So FDR got people working again, basically by what we would call big government spending today. And FDR was also able to get Social Security passed and led the country in World War II with an all the while expanding government, giving some modest gains to civil rights movements. But he refused to sign an anti-lynching law, which is bad. And that anti-lynching law, I think, was just on the floor of Congress 6 months ago or something like that.
Today. Yes, a couple of days ago.
Couple days ago. Okay.
Yeah, Rand Paul tried to sidetrack it by narrowing the definition, and then two of my not favorite people, but I was happy to see him do this. Kamala Harris and Cory Booker read him the Riot Act and stuff, and it hasn't. I don't think it's passed yet, but it's still alive, I think.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy that this country hasn't made it illegal to lynch people.
Yeah, it's insane.
There's been so many attempts to do it, and it always gets sidetracked by someone like Rand Paul, or
Well, he's from Kentucky.
Yeah,
right. I'm sure there's plenty of people in Kentucky that would be okay with that passing, but he is one of the elites in Kentucky.
Yeah, and the racist jerks.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of those in America still, believe it or not.
Well, when you're based on it, it kind of There's that novel that argues that we might not have even had the Revolutionary War if it wasn't for slavery.
That's true.
And the movement. There's differing opinions on whether that book is true or not, but it's a good argument.
Yeah,
definitely a good argument.
So the WPA and the CCC and they get people working. And FDR was also able to get Social Security passed. I already mentioned that. So FDR oftentimes in a public school classroom is, described as this, benevolent grandfather that helped the country through one of its darkest times and stuff. And maybe you could make that case. But he was also putting Americans of Japanese descent. I'm not talking about Japanese immigrants that just came from Japan. I'm talking about people that had lived, or their families had lived in California for generations. And they were taken, George Takei was one of them. The guy that played Mr. Miyagi, Pat Morita, was one of them. They were taken and they were given, I think, a week to pack a suitcase, and then they had to get on a army truck, and they were taken to concentration camps where they stayed until the end of the war.
And white people took over their businesses, bought their houses, ended up with their family heirlooms such as swords and books, and there was a lot of lost during that time.
They lost everything, and that wasn't even, there were no attempts at reparations until Clinton was president.
Yep. One of the things I'll give him credit for. Although,
right.
I mean, it was literally passed through Congress, but he signed it. He didn't fight it.
Right. And I think the reparation was $20,000 or something. Like, they gave the survivors $20,000. I think that's what
the black people get nothing.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
We built the country, but
yeah. And there were people that were, this is not related, but there were people that, there were guys that were taken into the army out of these concentration camps.
Yep.
The 442nd Regimental Combat Team.
One of the Hawaiian Congress people was in it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, the one that Ollie North berated during his questioning about patriotism and stuff like that. The guy who fought in World War II.
Besides all the concentration camps and the refusing to sign anti-lynching laws and stuff like that, that's great, unless you're a old school Southern Democrat. And some of them felt alienated by FDR's, modest help for civil rights and unions and so forth. And so they either became Republicans or stopped voting or stayed with the party just because they'd always been Democrats. But it would be intellectually irresponsible by this time to say that the Democrats were the same Democratic Party of the 1860s, because it just didn't look the same anymore. Before FDR died, he was trying to get a second Bill of Rights passed that would have promised housing, healthcare, jobs, and education to every American, but it never materialized. Interesting fact, if you read the Soviet constitutions, most of them promised housing, healthcare, jobs, and education to every Soviet citizen.
Reality might have been slightly different, but...
they all had housing.
Housing, yes. I mean, I'm just saying not everybody got the education because they didn't have the resources to give everybody the education. I mean, up to high school. I'm talking about higher education.
You could get a higher education, but you couldn't always do what you wanted. I was just talking to a Russian couple that my wife works with, the woman from the couple, and they were both born and raised in the Soviet Union, and they both have like really high degrees. Like, she has a degree in civil engineering, and he was a nuclear missile silo commander. So they were both like the privileged elite of the Soviet system, but they had a lot of really good things to say about the education system there.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, they did the first limb reattachment. I mean, they did a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, they totally beat us in space. I think that the reason that the American education system was as good as it was in the 50s and 60s was just so that we could compete with the Soviets. One of the best things that ever happened to the United States social programs was the Soviet Union.
Oh, the Cold War ending was bad for America.
Oh yeah, because now the
American worker, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. The only people that this country has to compete with to look better now are, goat herders in Afghanistan.
Or China, who pays their people nothing. Well, It's getting better, but it's still, yeah. I mean, if you look at Chinese engineers, they're still not American, except for maybe at Beidai or one of the big universities over there. They don't equal our engineers, but they still use the amount of Chinese engineers to say that America can't compete.
Right. Oh yeah, no, that's true. The end of the war was overseen by President Harry Truman, who was an old school Democrat who used horrific racist language and mixed company. You can read all about that. I'm not going to repeat the things that he used to say. In the 1950s, there was a move by both parties to support business again, and conservative think tanks started to emerge. Some of these, were funded by big business and so forth.
Fee was a really big one, and they're the ones that made Milton Friedman an actual person. He was an academic con artist in your state for the California Real Estate Association before Fee found him, and then they turned him into basically their academic spokesboy.
Right. Look, we have an intellectual.
There you go.
So to court the vote of the alienated Southern Democrats who'd seen their party go from states' rights, pro-business, small government to the one of FDR, and FDR started supporting civil rights for minorities and feminism, the Republican Party started going more towards what the Democrats used to be like. In 1964, on a television program called the General Electric Theater, a B-movie actor named Ronald Reagan gave a nationally televised speech in support of the Barry Goldwater campaign, who was a conservative Republican. And this is kind of the beginning of what we now call the neoconservative movement, or we could even call it the modern Republican Party.
I think that's more fair.
Right. And you can read the speech for yourself, but I have some excerpts, some quotes. No nation in history has ever survived a tax burden that reached a third of its national income. He said, I think it's time to ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended by the founding fathers. This is something that modern Republicans do a lot. They invoke the founding fathers all the time, almost as if they're godlike figures.
Not realizing our entire government is built on compromise, not actually the best governance.
Right. He said, this is the issue of this election in 1964, whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives better for us than we can. This is this intellectual elite. Donald Trump rails against the intellectual elite, and modern conservatives rail against the intellectual elite. If you listen to, even if you go on any social media post and you go through the comments section, I guarantee you're going to run into some conservative that's railing against the coastal elites. So this was the time that that politicians started going to small towns in the Midwest and sitting on bales of hay and pretending to be, a farmer and using simple language because they didn't want to alienate people that were uneducated. And this begins this anti-intellectual narrative that the conservatives hold even to this day. The importance of the time for choosing speech is that this creates the framing for the modern Republican Party. So during this time, the Democratic Party was becoming more and more supportive of the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movement, and other causes. The Democratic Party was also mostly vocal against the Vietnam War. And as the Vietnam War continued to go on, and nobody really even understood why we were there, both parties began to sort of turn against the Vietnam War.
I'm going to look at it, but you're getting there.
Yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay,
that's kind of where I'm going to end. I'm going to touch on some other stuff, but Nixon is kind of the big last point that I'm going to make. So Nixon, in the context of the late 60s and early 70s, was a far right president in his time. A lot of people they probably would have viewed him the way that we view Trump, as being this kind of
he was still a joke way after he was gone.
Right, yeah. But he was really offensive to what we call liberals in this country and stuff like that. So I think a lot of conservatives liked him for that purpose, just because he trolled people, right? But he did a lot of very illegal things as president. So he's a far-right president. But by today's standards, he would be more like a centrist Republican. So he would have been more like, it's not fair to say he would be like this because he doesn't exist in today's politics, but he would be more like, I don't know. Sometimes I wish John McCain were still alive, And that's crazy because I don't agree with most of the things he thought, but he brought sanity to the Republican Party sometimes.
Every now and then, micro bursts of sanity.
Right. Or he would be considered like a far right Democrat of today, like maybe Biden or Clinton or something like that. And here's why. Because he was the president that created OSHA. He was there and signed a number of environmental regulations into law. So these are things that the modern Republican Party have dismantled, or even Democrats have dismantled.
Yeah. Well, I think he gets credit for that. Sorry. He gets credit for that. But a lot of like the clean, I don't remember if it was the Clean Water or the Clean Air Act, whichever came first. He vetoed it, and then it passed over his veto. So if you read his like diary or whatever, he said he just let the other one pass because he knew he didn't want to be embarrassed again. So he just went along with all that environmental stuff because he knew he couldn't veto it.
Oh, I'm sure that he was no tree hugger.
Which is the problem with looking at history through a president.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you should never look at the history,
especially when legislation is very important at that period.
Right. But he also started the war on drugs, which you talked about its long-term lasting implications.
And he did that to burn the hippies and the black peoples.
Right.
Which he literally says it on the tapes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that laid the groundwork for mass incarceration, the crack epidemic that was fueled by the CIA, mass incarceration of people of color, and so forth. He illegally and secretly bombed Cambodia, which helped create the Khmer Rouge and empowered Pol Pot, who has a human rights record that would make Hitler faint. He illegally paid using public money for people that he called White House plumbers. They did not unclog the toilet when he had his morning constitutional. They actually stopped leaks, not leaks of water, leaks of information. And once he ordered them to famously break into the DNC headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. The guy that just went to prison who's friends with Trump, what was his name? The one with the round glasses. He looks like a cartoon character.
Kissinger had done that. And Kissinger also, so Kissinger's responsible for 7 years of American and Vietnamese deaths right there. And then if Kissinger also delayed the Iranian hostage release.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he basically went over there and said, hey, we'll sell you rockets that will then use the money that we sell those rockets for to buy drugs, to find the Costanistas and all that stuff. So basically, him going over and delaying the hostage release, and it just happened to happen on Reagan's inauguration day, was the beginning of Iran-Contra. So Kissinger's scum just all the way around. He is an evil human being. When Bernie Sanders says, well, one of the things I can definitely say is Kissinger is no friend of mine, he was literally saying how he was not a piece of shit.
Right.
That if you truly knew the history, you knew what he was. It was basically a big FU to Hillary.
Right. So yeah, he illegally bombs Cambodia. It's Roger Stone was the name. Roger Stone was associated with the White House plumbers. So he was part of all the Watergate stuff. He was part of all the illegal things Nixon was doing. He actually has a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back.
I remember that.
Yeah. He was so Nixon was the first president to use the term liberal media. And he was the first president to promote this idea that the media has a liberal left-wing bias. And that's because the media was reporting on the illegal things he was doing. I guess Republican presidents would just prefer that the media doesn't report on the illegal things they do, I guess. They were reporting on the illegal
media. It's not the people who own the media. It's just maybe the reporters are liberal.
Oh, yeah. They would never have a problem with the billionaires that run the media. No, of course not.
Yeah. They were golfing with them.
Yeah. So they were reporting on things like the illegal bombing of Cambodia that was secret. They were reporting on the Watergate scandal. They were reporting on the dirty tricks because there was more to the plumbers than just Watergate. They were going around and digging up dirt on political opponents to Nixon and then publishing, either fake or sensationalized stories or embarrassing stories, or sometimes they would blackmail people. And, by reporting on that, Nixon thought that the media had a left-wing bias. And the Pentagon Papers also that showed that the Vietnam War was started under false pretenses and continued under false pretenses.
Which people somehow say Snowden was different than the guy who leaked the Pentagon Papers.
Right. Well, they tried to arrest Daniel Ellsberg too, but back then it was illegal to tap somebody's phone without a warrant. It isn't now, but it used to be illegal to do that.
Yeah, if they're considered traitors or whatever, enemies of the state.
Right. So anyway, as a result of being caught with his hand in the cookie jar, Nixon avoided impeachment by resigning. He just said, okay, well, I'm not a crook. I'm out of here. And so after that, you have the emergence of the two parties that we now recognize as the Republican and Democratic parties with the platforms that we associate with them.
Well, if you look at the American Libertarian Party, to kind of connect my section to yours, the 1980 Republican ALP platform is the 2020 Republican platform.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Then you have Reagan, who he was Reagan. He was the same Reagan of the General Electric Theater. And he was bringing that speech kind of to the fore and implementing it into national policy. And this is the Republican and Democratic parties that we have now. They're not interested in changing anything really for the better. They're there to maintain social stability, either through social programs to ease the suffering of people in the lower classes,
which they pretty much stopped.
Right. Or through state violence to imprison them and get them off the streets and make them work that way. So there you have it.
All right. Yeah. And did you know Reagan, just a quick aside, Reagan actually realized that Star Wars was bullcrap, but he kept on going with it because he said it would be political suicide to not keep on spending money on it.
Right. Yeah. No, at least he was against wasteful government spending.
He was, but he did, when it was bad for him, he still spent it.
Of course. Yeah.
So, I mean, he is the infamous $5,000 toilet seat.
Right.
That stuff happened during his term. So, I mean, I still think that probably is a way. What some people have said that's the way the Black Ops programs get funded.
Yeah, I believe that.
I believe that's possible, but I also believe contractors just screw the government constantly.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
$2 billion Veterans Affairs office here built, and because of change orders and stuff like that, they gave us like a third, 2/3 maybe of what we wanted in that building.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, and in the comments you can say what you think we did was right, what was wrong, and I should have a link to subscribe so we can get better. Maybe put some white screens behind us, so
right?
I can put some background besides my family room, and well, actually, he's got a pretty decent background, but maybe I can put like graphics and stuff like that up here. I'm going to try to insert some. Just depends on what my cheap free editing program will let me do, and YouTube. And we're going to also make this a podcast, so hopefully be able to listen to it on various other platforms. Let's do that. So what can we do now to get this, to fix what's going on? I mean, Bernie here it is. I don't want to be too hard on him, but what I think is the Democrats really got to him psychologically by constantly calling him, he caused Trump. And if you show, she won the popular vote. She just didn't campaign in 2 swing states that he won. He won the Electoral College because she didn't do that. But whatever, I'm not going to talk about that whole campaign. That could be an entire 4-hour program. But he really internalized them telling him that he caused Trump to be elected, and he knew that because of Nader, that they were going to call him a spoiler. So even in the first one, he was a little too not anti-establishment enough. So the second election, he really pushed that he was going to vote blue no matter who. He would support whoever the nominee was, and he gave away all his power, because here it is. If you're not willing to not vote for somebody and then actually carry through it, you got no power.
Right.
It's why I'm part of a movement to not vote for the Dim this time. It's not because if they don't give us anything, why are we voting for them?
Right. And it's not like we choose the president anyway, so I don't really get that hung up on presidential elections.
No, but if they're going to push constantly away from what their base wants,
right,
you've got to fight back. And it's a lot easier to go to a protest and vote than it is to take up arms,
right?
Go full on revolution. So if you're thinking, oh, that's bad, blah, 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 alternatives are horrible. I mean,
right.
Nobody wins in those alternatives. So use your vote and stuff like that. But also challenge the media. Make sure you watch alternative media. Maybe at some point we might have a link of some sites that you can get good information from and stuff like that. Below, we'll have an open Google Docs that'll have all of our sources so that you can read whatever we're researching. And by no means is that a complete list of stuff you should read. But sort of like a Wikipedia page, sometimes it can give you a good start.
Right. Yeah. I kind of think people should stop. I mean, if nobody's going to trust the media or any media, because some alternative media is absolute hot garbage. The Epoch Times is crazy, just insane commie conspiracy theories and stuff the Epoch Times.
Oh, I've never even read that one.
Oh man, it's crazy. My mom got a newspaper by them in the mail for free. I guess they're sending them to older people, but it's all about the Chinese Communist Party is coming to get you.
Which is about as communist as the Republican Party is.
Yeah, exactly. They arrested a bunch of communists in China a few months ago.
People.
Yeah, they're not communists.
No. They used to be. Back when Mao's first 5 years, they were communists. After that...
Yeah. Yeah, even then they didn't have communism. The world's never...
No. But I mean, he at least did some good stuff.
Yeah.
Is all I'm saying.
In
fact, China has a saying, if Mao had died in 1957, he'd be a god.
Right.
Because he did a lot of good in that first 5 years, and then his ego went to shit. And then the Second Great Leap Forward failed miserably and killed 20 to 60 million people. And he went nuts.
So I think, alternative media or even some established media isn't bad. It's still good. It's got, good people to get a job at PBS NewsHour or something, you have to actually be good at journalism. You can't just be some guy off the street. You have to be top of your class to get a job for, or even the New York Times or whatever. But if you go to the source yourself, I mean, I was trained as a historian in college. So I was taught that you go to the original source of the information and you read what they said and you understand the context they wrote it in, and then you form your own opinion on it. And you can do that. You don't have to do that with historical documents. You can do that with legislation. I can't tell you how many times on social media I've seen people talking about this law does this. And if you actually if you go to the Congress website and you punch that law in, it doesn't talk about any of the things they say that it does. So you can't believe it.
The ACA.
Right. Yeah. Or there's a bunch of different.
That's just the most famous thing I could think of for that.
Yeah.
Because remember, Jon Stewart sat there and argued with the person that was talking about the death panels.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the death panels. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty much out of talking points for this one.
I am too. So I think we can stop recording.
All right.
And hey, so like I said, click subscribe, click like, click that bell, and
give us money.
Yeah, give us money. We'll have something up there we haven't decided which one we're going to do. But that money will go to making this a better production. Who knows? Well, we're planning on always improving, making the 10th show look nothing like the first show.
Yes.
So, we'll see you next week.
All right.